Hello everyone, welcome back to Midnight Lullaby. I know many of you are here to drift gently into sleep. Before you close your eyes, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Let me know where in the world you're listening from. Now, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let the story carry you into dreams. Story 1. I discovered Wonderland Park by accident, the way you discover most forgotten things, by not looking for them at all. I was driving back from a failed job interview in the city, taking back roads to avoid traffic, when I saw the rusted sign half hidden by overgrown vines. The paint was faded, but I could still make out the words, and the cartoon mascot, a grinning rabbit with one ear missing. He pointing toward a gravel road that disappeared into the woods. I should have kept driving. I had no reason to stop, no particular interest in abandoned places. But there was something about that rabbit's smile, the way it seemed to follow me, even as I passed, that made me pull over onto the shoulder. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, telling myself I was being ridiculous. But my hands were already turning off the ignition. The gravel road was rough, clearly unused for years. Branches scraped against my car windows, and more than once I considered turning back. But after about half a mile, the woods opened up, and there it was, Wonderland Park, spread out before me like a fever dream made solid. The park must have closed decades ago. Rust covered everything, and nature had begun the slow process of reclamation. Grass pushed up through cracked asphalt. Vines wrapped around ticket booths and concession stands. But the rides remained, skeletal and strange against the gray sky. A Ferris wheel tilted slightly to one side, a carousel with horses frozen mid-gallop, a roller coaster track that snaked through the trees like a steel serpent. I got out of my car. The air smelled of rust and rotting wood, and something else. Something sweet and chemical that reminded me of cotton candy left out in the sun. The wind moved through the park, creating sounds that almost resembled music, metal groaning against metal in something like melody. The main gate stood open, the turnstiles long since rusted in place. I walked through, feeling like I was crossing some invisible threshold. The midway stretched before me, lined with game booths, where you once could win stuffed animals by throwing rings or shooting water guns. The prizes were still there, decades of weather having turned them into nightmare versions of themselves. Teddy bears with moldering fur, plastic dolls with sun, bleached faces staring out from behind grimy glass. I'm not sure why I stayed. Curiosity, maybe. Or the strange pull of nostalgia for a place I'd never been. I walked deeper into the park, documenting everything with my phone camera, thinking I might turn it into a photography project. Something to show I had creative interests beyond corporate design work. That's when I first heard the music. It came from the carousel, a tinkling melody that seemed to emerge from the structure itself, rather than any mechanical source. I approached slowly, my footsteps crunching on debris. The carousel horses were in various states of decay, their painted surfaces chipped and faded. But they were beautiful in their ruin, frozen in expressions of joy or terror, depending on how you looked at them. The music stopped as I got close, cutting off mid-note. I stood there in the sudden silence, feeling foolish. Of course there was no music, just the wind, just metal expanding and contracting. Just my imagination filling empty spaces with sound. I reached out and touched one of the horses, a white mare with a golden saddle. The paint was rough under my fingers, cold despite the afternoon sun. For a moment, I could have sworn I felt something pulse beneath the surface, like a heartbeat. But that was impossible. Adjust the vibration of wind through the structure, I told myself. I spent another hour exploring the park, taking photos, letting my mind wander through stories of what this place might have been. I imagined summer days filled with children's laughter, the smell of popcorn and fried dough, the thrill of rides spinning against a blue sky. Who had worked here? Who had come here? What had caused it all to end? The sun was setting when I finally returned to my car. The park looked different in the golden light, almost beautiful, almost alive, as I drove back down that gravel road. I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw the Ferris wheel silhouetted against the sky. For just a moment, I thought I saw lights, small and flickering, like stars or candles arranged around its circumference. But when I looked again, there was only darkness. I went back 2 days later. I told myself it was for more photos, that I wanted to capture the place in different light. But the truth was more complicated. The park had gotten under my skin somehow, infected my thoughts. I dreamed about it that first night walking through the midway while rides spun around me, empty seats rising and falling, and that carousel music playing endlessly on a loop. This time, I came prepared with better camera equipment and a flashlight. I arrived in the late afternoon, planning to photograph the park at dusk. The gravel road seemed shorter somehow, and when I emerged from the woods, the park looked different. Not dramatically so, but in small ways I couldn't quite articulate. Had that game booth been leaning at that angle before? Were those tire tracks by the entrance new? I pushed the thoughts away and started shooting. The light was perfect. That golden hour glow that makes everything look touched by magic. I photographed the Ferris wheel, the roller coaster, the fun house with its distorted mirrors, still somehow intact. I was so focused on composition and lighting that I almost didn't notice when the carousel started moving. It was just a small rotation at first, barely perceptible. I might have dismissed it as wind or my own movement creating an illusion. But then it completed a full revolution, horses rising and falling on their poles, in that familiar carousel motion. And the music started again, louder this time, more insistent. I stood frozen, camera hanging forgotten around my neck. The carousel spun faster, gathering momentum, and I could see now that it wasn't just moving randomly. The horses were arranged in a pattern, their positions creating something like a code or message I couldn't quite read. The music swelled, no longer the simple tinkling melody, but something more complex, with harmonies that seemed to come from multiple sources at once. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The carousel ground to a halt, horses settling into new positions. The silence that followed was profound, absolute. Even the wind had died. I should have left then. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back in my car and drive away and never return. But I was rooted to the spot, staring at the carousel, trying to understand what I'd just witnessed. There had to be a rational explanation. Maybe the park wasn't as abandoned as I'd thought. Maybe some mechanism had been triggered by my presence. Some automated system still clinging to its programming after all these years. The light was fading fast now. I checked my phone and was surprised to see it was past 8. How long had I been standing there? The battery was at 15%, which seemed wrong. I'd charged it fully before leaving home. I took a few more photos. The flash creating harsh shadows in the gathering dark, and started back toward the entrance. That's when I saw the Ferris wheel was lit. Not brightly, but with a soft glow that seemed to come from within the structure itself. Small lights traced the wheel's circumference, pulsing gently like breathing. I watched them for several minutes, trying to determine if this was another automatic system, another ghost of the park's past, refusing to die. But there was something deliberate about the pattern, something that suggested intention. I walked toward the Ferris wheel, drawn by that gentle light. Up close, I could see the bulbs weren't electric at all, or if they were unlike any I'd seen before. They seemed organic somehow, like bioluminescence, casting a blue-green glow that made everything around them look submerged, underwater. The gondolas swayed slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel. One hung at the loading platform, its door open, waiting. I could see inside worn seats, safety bar pushed up in the unlocked position. The floor scattered with leaves and debris, but otherwise intact. Without thinking, without deciding, I stepped inside. The door closed behind me with a gentle click. The safety bar lowered itself, settling across my lap with a firm but not uncomfortable pressure. And then, smoothly and silently, the Ferris wheel began to turn. I rose into the air, the park spreading out beneath me. From this height, I could see the entire layout, the midway leading to different sections, the dark bulk of the funhouse, the roller coaster tracks winding through trees, now black against the deepening sky. And I could see lights, dozens of them, scattered throughout the park like fallen stars. The carousel was lit now, spinning slowly. The game booths glowed from within. Even the funhouse pulsed with a soft radiance. The wheel carried me higher, and I understood with a clarity that felt like revelation. The park had never been abandoned. It had been waiting for twilight, waiting for someone to witness, waiting to come alive again in whatever way such places do, when they're no longer bound by the physics of the waking world. At the top of the arc, the wheel stopped. I hung there, suspended between earth and sky, and I could see beyond the park now, out into the woods and the road I'd driven in on. My car sat in the gravel lot, looking small and impossibly far away. Not the world beyond seemed faded somehow, less real than the glowing park beneath me. The wheel began to descend, and as I came down, I saw them figures moving between the rides. They weren't clear, more like suggestions of people. Shadows with more substance than they should have. They gathered around the carousel, lined up at game booths, filled the empty seats on rides that had started moving now, all of them spinning and turning in perfect synchronization. When my gondola reached the bottom, the safety bar lifted. The door opened. I stepped out onto the platform, my legs unsteady, and found myself facing the midway. The lights were brighter now, almost overwhelming, and the music had returned, not just from the carousel, but from everywhere at once. A symphony of calliope and pipe organ, and something that might have been voices. I walked forward because I didn't know what else to do. The shadow figures parted for me, and I realized they were watching, waiting to see what I would do. At the center of the midway, where all paths converged, stood a game booth I hadn't noticed before. It was more elaborate than the others, with a striped awning and a sign that read simply, PLAY. Behind the counter stood something that might have been a person once, or perhaps had never been, but had learned to approximate the shape. It smiled at me with too many teeth. Or maybe that was just the way the light fell across its face. One game, it said, its voice like the rustle of old paper. Everyone who comes here gets one game. What am I playing for? I heard myself ask. The figure's smile widened. The only thing anyone ever plays for. The only thing that matters. It gestured to the game 3 bottles stacked in a pyramid. A rack of balls worn smooth by decades of throwing. So simple. So familiar. I'd played this game 100 times as a child. At county fairs and boardwalks, always falling short, never quite winning the big prize. And if I win, I asked. You go home, it said. Back to your car, back to your life, back to everything that was waiting for you before you found this place. And you never come back. Never even remember the way. And if I lose? The figure said nothing, but its silence was answer enough. I looked around at the shadow figures, at the rides spinning in their endless loops, at the lights that pulsed like a heartbeat. How many of them had stood where I was standing? How many had played this game and lost? I picked up a ball. It felt wrong in my hand, too light and too heavy at the same time, as if it existed in 2 states simultaneously. The bottles waited, their surfaces catching and reflecting the strange lights in ways that hurt to look at directly. I threw. The ball sailed through the air in slow motion, or perhaps time itself had changed, bending around this moment. It struck the top bottle, and for an instant, I thought I'd missed. But then the bottle toppled, and the 2 beneath it fell as well, clattering to the counter with a sound like breaking glass and distant thunder. The lights flickered. The music skipped. The shadow, figures rippled like reflections on disturbed water. Well, the figure behind the counter said, and something that might have been disappointment or relief crossed its face. That's quite rare, you know. Most people don't win. What do I win? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Your life, it said simply. The same one you had before. Tomorrow, you'll wake up, and this will feel like a dream. You'll remember coming here once, taking some photos, feeling unsettled by an abandoned place. Nothing more. The park will stay where it is, waiting for the next person to find it. And the others. I gestured to the shadow figures, the ones who lost. They're home, the figure said. They found what they were looking for, even if they didn't know they were looking for it. Not everyone wants to leave, you see. Not everyone is satisfied with the life they had before. I thought about my failed interview, my empty apartment, the string of disappointing jobs and relationships that had brought me to that road at that particular moment. I thought about how the park had felt more real, more alive than anything I'd experienced in years. I thought about how easy it would be to stay, to let the lights and music wash over me until I became another shadow moving between the rides. Time to go, the figure said, and its voice was not unkind. The lights began to dim. The music faded. The rides slowed their spinning, winding down like clockwork toys running out of spring. The shadow figures grew less distinct, melting back into the darkness from which they'd emerged. And I walked back down the midway, through the rusted turnstiles, across the cracked asphalt to where my car waited. I didn't look back. I knew if I did, I might see something that would make me reconsider, make me want to stay. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove down that gravel road with my eyes fixed straight ahead. When I reached the main road, I did glance in my rearview mirror. The woods were dark, the entrance invisible. The sign with its grinning rabbit was gone, or perhaps had never been there at all. That was 3 weeks ago. I've tried to find Wonderland Park since then, driven up and down that road a dozen times, looking for the gravel turnoff. It's not there. I've searched online, looked through archives and historical records. No evidence that such a park ever existed in that location. No permits, no photographs. No newspaper articles about its opening or closing. But I have my photos. At least I did. When I got home that night, my camera was full of images, the carousel horses, the Ferris wheel, the midway at sunset. But over the following days, they began to change. The colors faded, the details blurred. Now they're nothing but static, gray and meaningless, as if the park is erasing itself from record, retreating back into whatever space it occupies between the world that is and the world that might be. I still dream about it, though. Every night, I walk through those gates, hear that music, watch the lights pulse in the darkness, and sometimes, in the moment between waking and sleep, I can feel the weight of that ball in my hand, the perfect arc of its throw, the satisfying crash as the bottles fell. I won the game. I earned my life back. But I wonder, in those quiet hours before dawn, if I made the right choice. Because the truth is, I can't remember what I was so eager to get back to. My apartment feels less real than those glowing rides. My job, when I finally found one, seems like play acting compared to that moment, suspended at the top of the Ferris wheel, seeing the world laid out beneath me in all its impossible beauty. The park is still out there. I'm certain of that. Waiting in the spaces between roads, in the moments of transition when you're not quite sure where you are or how you got there. Waiting for the next person who needs to find it, who's lost enough that an abandoned amusement park can feel like coming home. And sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, I get in my car and I drive. I take back roads I've never seen before, following instincts I don't quite understand. Looking for a rusted sign with a rabbit that smiles too wide, searching for a gravel road that leads into the woods. Hoping to find my way back to Wonderland Park, back to that booth with its pyramid of bottles, back to a choice I made but might unmake if given the chance. Because I'm starting to think that winning the game was the loss after all. And what I lost is precisely what I've been looking for my entire life. In all those disappointing jobs and empty apartments and failed relationships, I lost the chance to belong somewhere, to be part of something larger than myself, even if that something exists only in twilight, powered by strange lights and impossible music. The park is waiting. I know this the way you know truth when you hear it, the way you recognize home when you've been lost for too long. And one of these nights, when I'm driving those back roads, I'm going to find that gravel turnoff again. The rabbit will point the way with its broken ear and its too wide smile. And this time, I'm not sure I'll win the game. This time, I'm not sure I'll want to. Story 2. I've taken the midnight train for 6 years now. Working the late shift at the hospital means I'm always one of the last to leave, always catching that final southbound service at 12 hours and 47 a.m. You get to know the rhythm of it. The particular squeal of the brakes at each station. The flickering fluorescent lights in car number 4. The smell of disinfectant mixed with something older, more fundamental. Metal and electricity and human passage. You get to know the faces too. There's usually a handful of us regulars. Marcus, or the security guard with the thermos of coffee that he never actually drinks. The young woman in scrubs like mine, though from a different hospital. We've never spoken, but we nod to each other in recognition. The older man who always sits in the same seat, third from the door, reading a paperback novel with yellowed pages. And others, transients, their faces changing, but their exhaustion identical. Night workers. The invisible city. But 3 weeks ago, something changed. It started with Marcus. I'd boarded at my usual stop, Medical Center Station, and walked through to the third car where I typically sit. The train was less crowded than usual. Just me, the reading man, and a couple arguing in hushed voices at the far end. No Marcus in his usual spot near the door. I thought nothing of it then. People miss trains. People call in sick. People's schedules change. The train lurched forward with its familiar metallic groan. Through the windows. The station platform slid away, replaced by the rushing darkness of the tunnel. Advertisements and safety posters blurred into streaks of color. The lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. At the next stop, Riverside, the arguing couple got off. No one got on. At Hamilton Square, the reading man carefully marked his page, stood, and walked to the doors. He turned back just before exiting, and for the briefest moment, his eyes met mine. There was something in his expression. Not fear exactly, but a kind of profound sadness, as if he were leaving behind something precious. Then he was gone, and I was alone in the car. Alone, but not quite alone. Because as the doors closed and the train pulled away from Hamilton Square, I saw her. The woman in scrubs. She was sitting in the reflection of the window across from me, clear as daylight. But when I turned to look directly, the seat was empty. I looked back at the window. Still there. Still visible in the reflection, staring straight ahead, her face pale and drawn. My rational mind offered explanations. Fatigue, a trick of the light. The window reflecting an image from another car somehow. But the reflection didn't waver when I moved. Didn't change angle. Just sat there, perfectly still, perfectly visible, perfectly impossible. The train slowed for the next station, waterfront. I stood quickly, suddenly desperate to leave, to break whatever spell had fallen over this journey. But as I approached the doors, I saw them. In every window's reflection, in every darkened pane of glass, figures sitting in the empty seats. Dozens of them, all in various states of night shift attire, hospital scrubs, security uniforms, maintenance coveralls, fast food restaurant shirts, all staring forward with that same empty expression, all translucent in the reflections, but absent in reality. The doors opened. I stumbled onto the waterfront platform, my heart hammering. The station was deserted, its white tiles gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights. Behind me, the train doors closed. I watched it pull away, and in every window I could see them. The phantom passengers sitting patiently, going nowhere, trapped in reflections that shouldn't exist. I took a taxi home that night. Cost me $40 I couldn't really afford, but it seemed worth it. I called in sick the next 2 days, told myself I'd been overworked, stressed, hallucinatory from exhaustion. I slept poorly both nights, dreaming of train cars full of silent figures, all turning to look at me simultaneously. But bills don't pay themselves, and sick days run out. On the third night, I returned to work, and at 12:47 a.m., I found myself back on the platform at Medical Center Station, watching the last train arrive. I told myself I'd take a different car. I told myself it had been my imagination. I told myself a lot of things that I didn't quite believe. The train arrived, and I stepped into the first car this time. There were 3 other passengers. A teenager with headphones, a janitor with a mop bucket, and a woman holding a sleeping child. Real people. solid people. I felt relief wash over me. At Riverside, the teenager got off. At Hamilton Square, the janitor exited with his bucket. At Waterfront, the woman with the child stood to leave. As she passed me, the child's eyes opened briefly. They were completely black, like wells of ink. The mother's face remained serene as she carried the thing out onto the platform. I was alone again. The doors closed. The train began to move, and slowly, one by one, the reflections appeared in the windows. First just a few, then more, filling the seats around me in the mirrored world, while the physical world remained empty. I closed my eyes and kept them closed until my stop. This became my new routine. Board the train, sit down, close my eyes, count the stops by the sound of the doors and the announcements. Don't look at the windows. Don't acknowledge what might be reflected there. Get off at my stop with eyes still mostly closed, feeling my way to the exit. It worked for 4 days. On the 5th day, the train didn't stop at my station. I opened my eyes when I realized we'd passed Union Terminal, my stop. The announcement system had called it out. Union Terminal. Next stop, and I'd stood waiting. But the train hadn't slowed. It had accelerated instead, plunging deeper into the tunnel with a shriek of metal on metal. I looked around the car wildly, still empty. But in the windows, the reflections were standing now. All of them. Pressed against the glass from the other side, their hands flat against the panes, their mouths moving in words I couldn't hear. The train rocketed through Union Terminal without stopping. I caught a glimpse of the platform. Empty at this late hour, the arrival board showing no more trains after midnight. The last train, the final service. Beyond Union Terminal, the tunnel changed. The walls became rougher, older, as if we'd left the modern infrastructure behind and entered something more ancient. The lights in the car began to flicker more rapidly, casting everything in a strobe-like effect. In the windows, the reflections were screaming now. Silent screams, their mouths wide, their eyes desperate, and I realized with a sickening clarity that I recognized some of them. The reading man, the young woman in scrubs, Marcus, all the passengers who'd disappeared over the past 3 weeks. The train began to slow. Ahead, impossibly, I saw lights. A station platform coming into view. But it wasn't on any map I'd ever seen. The signs were written in a language that seemed to shift and change as I looked at it, familiar and alien all at once. The train stopped. The doors opened. Beyond the doors, the platform was crowded. Hundreds of people in night, shift attire, standing motionless, staring at the train. Waiting. Next stop, last terminal. A voice announced over the intercom. But it wasn't the recorded voice I'd heard thousands of times. It was human. Raw. Desperate. All passengers must disembark. This is the final destination. The last terminal. The end of the line. I remained in my seat, frozen. The figures on the platform began to move, shuffling toward the open doors. Their movements were wrong. Jerky. As if they were forgetting how bodies worked. As if they were learning human motion from corrupted footage. They began to board. I ran, deeper into the train, through door after door, car after car. But the train seemed to extend infinitely now. Each car identical to the last, each filled with more reflections in the windows, pressing close, reaching through the glass with hands that phased through solid matter like smoke. Behind me, I could hear the boarding passengers, their footsteps shuffling, dragging, getting closer. I burst through another door and found myself in a car that was different, older. The seats were vintage, the advertisements on the walls decades out of date. And sitting in those seats were passengers, real, solid passengers. But they were wearing clothes from the 1970s, the 1950s, earlier. They turned to look at me as I stumbled through, and their eyes were hollow, empty. Just dark sockets in faces that were both preserved and decaying simultaneously, as if caught between states of being and non-being. "You're new," one of them said, a woman in a pillbox hat and pearls. Her voice sounded like it was being played on an old radio, crackling with static. "Fresh. Recently caught. Kite," I managed to gasp. "The last train always needs passengers," she replied, her smile too wide, too fixed. "It's been running for a very long time, longer than the city, longer than memory. It runs beneath everything, collecting those who travel at the wrong hours, who exist in the between times. Night workers, insomniacs, the forgotten and invisible. We all board eventually. We all ride forever." The shuffling footsteps were getting closer. I could see them now through the windows between cars. The newly boarded passengers, shambling forward, their faces slack, their eyes reflecting nothing. "But I have a home," I said desperately. "A life. People who'll miss me." "Do you?" Another passenger asked, a man in a conductor's uniform from some bygone era. "When do you see them? When do you exist in their world? You work nights. You sleep days. You live in the spaces between their lives. In the hours they don't occupy. You're already half ghost. The train just makes it official." I thought of my apartment, empty except when I collapsed into bed. My friends, contacted only through text messages sent at odd hours. My family, seen twice a year if I was lucky. The woman in scrubs I'd nodded at for 6 years without ever learning her name. The beauty of it, the woman in the pillbox hat continued, is that no one will truly notice. They'll think you quit, moved away, lost touch. People drift apart all the time, especially people who work nights, especially people who are already halfway invisible. I backed away from them, pressing against the door behind me. Through its window, I could see the pursuing passengers, only feet away now. Through the door ahead, more of the vintage travelers, rising from their seats, reaching toward me with hands that left traces of themselves in the air, like afterimages. "There is one way out," the conductor said. His voice was almost kind. "The train needs passengers, yes, but it also needs workers, drivers, conductors, maintenance crew, the eternal staff of an eternal route. If you're willing to join us in service, you can at least keep moving, keep purpose, keep some semblance of agency. And if I refuse? He gestured to the shuffling masses behind me. Then you join them. The passengers. The ones who just sit and stare and ride forever. Remembering what it felt like to have destinations. The pursuing crowd was at the door now, their hands pressing against the glass, leaving smears of something that wasn't quite moisture. Their faces were blank, empty. Whatever made them individuals was gone, worn away by endless travel to nowhere. I looked at the conductor. What do I have to do? Just put this on. He held out a uniform jacket, identical to the one he wore. And accept that this is your route now, your purpose, your eternity. I took the jacket with shaking hands. The fabric was heavy, smelling of old smoke and machine oil and time itself. As I pulled it on, I felt something shift. The train's mechanical heartbeat became my heartbeat. Its rote through the darkness became imprinted on my mind. An endless circuit of impossible stations, picking up passengers who would never leave, running on schedule to nowhere. Good, the conductor said, and there was genuine relief in his voice. We're short-staffed, you know. Have been for decades. People don't last long down here, even as employees. They forget why they're working. Forget they were ever anything else. But you seem strong. You might remember yourself for years, maybe even decades. He gestured down the car. Your first duty. Collect the fares. Fares. I looked at the vintage passengers, at the shuffling empty masses behind me, from them.
Everyone pays eventually, he said.
One way or another. Check their pockets. Check their bags. You'll find what they owe. I moved through the car, approaching the woman in the pillbox hat first. She sat primly, expectantly. I reached toward her, and she opened her purse. Inside, instead of money, I found moments. Tiny crystallized instants of life. A child's laugh, a first kiss, a sunset watched from a familiar porch. I took one, feeling it dissolve in my palm, feeling its warmth and light, absorbed into the train itself, fueling its eternal journey. Her face became slightly more transparent, slightly less there. Thank you, she whispered. It's almost a relief to give them up, to let go. I moved to the next passenger, and the next, collecting moments, memories. The small, precious things that make a life worth living. With each collection, the passengers faded a bit more, becoming translucent, becoming reflections, becoming ghosts. And I understood. This was the fare. This was the cost of riding the last train. Piece by piece, moment by moment, you gave up what made you human until there was nothing left but the shell. The habit of existence without its substance. How long? I asked the conductor, who watched approvingly from his position by the door. How long until I'm like them? Depends, he said, on how much you have to give, on how tightly you hold to who you were. Most make it a few years. Some, the lucky ones, only months. Time is different down here anyway. Doesn't move the way it did above. You'll see. The train lurched into motion again, pulling away from last terminal, heading deeper into tunnels that shouldn't exist, stopping at stations that had never been built. picking up passengers from platforms that existed only in the space between moments. And I realized this was my rote now, my eternity, collecting fares from the lost and the forgotten, watching them fade until nothing remained but the echo of who they'd been, reflected in glass and chrome and the burnished metal of a train that would never reach its final destination, because there was no final destination. There was only the journey, only the route, only the last train, running forever through the darkness beneath the city, beneath the world, beneath reality itself. I've lost track of how long I've been working this shift. The conductor told me it had been 3 months, but I've collected fares from thousands of passengers. I've watched entire cars full of people fade to nothing. I've seen the stations change, becoming older, more abstract, less tied to any geography I recognize. Sometimes I catch glimpses of the world above through gaps in the tunnel walls. I see my old apartment empty now, my belongings packed away or sold. I see my former colleagues at work. The new person filling my shift, already looking tired, already starting to exist only in the between hours. I see my family, and telling people I moved away, that I got a better job somewhere, that we lost touch. And sometimes, when the train surfaces briefly at the original stations I used to know, I see them boarding. The new night workers. The new people living invisible lives in invisible hours. I see the moment they notice the reflections in the windows. I see the moment they realize the train isn't stopping. I see them running through the cars, terrified, not yet understanding that there's nowhere to run to. Sometimes I try to warn them. I mouth words through the glass that separates the working cars from the passenger cars. Get off. Don't ride the last train. Take taxis. Walk home. Quit your night job. Become visible again before it's too late. But they can't hear me. Or they think I'm just another reflection. Another ghost among many. And maybe I am. I look at my hands sometimes, holding the fare collection device that's become grafted to my palm somehow. And I see I'm starting to become transparent. The memories I collect, the moments I take from the passengers, they're not just feeding the train. They're replacing what I have. Slowly, my own moments, my own memories, are being traded away for the collected experiences of strangers. I can't quite remember my mother's face anymore. Can't recall my own phone number. Can't picture my childhood home. These things have been swapped out, replaced with 1,000 fragmentary moments from 1,000 fading passengers. But I remember this. I remember the choice. The jacket. The conductor offering me purpose instead of oblivion. And I remember choosing. Choosing to keep moving, keep working, keep serving. Because even a terrible purpose seemed better than no purpose at all. Was I right? I don't know anymore. I don't know if the conductor was being kind or cruel. I don't know if working the last train is mercy or damnation. All I know is that I'm still here, still collecting fares, still watching the passengers fade, still riding the road that never ends, through stations that exist only in the darkness, serving a system whose purpose I no longer understand. And I know this: if you work nights, if you travel in the invisible hours, if you exist in the spaces between other people's lives, the last train will find you eventually. It always does. It's patient. It's eternal. It's already running beneath your city, waiting for the right moment, the right level of exhaustion, the right degree of invisibility. You'll board it thinking it's just another late train, just another commute, just another night. And then you'll notice the reflections. And then the train won't stop. And then you'll have a choice to make. Will you join the passengers, fading slowly into nothing, giving up piece by piece everything that made you real? Or will you put on the jacket? Will you join the eternal staff? Will you become like me? A conductor of the lost, a collector of fares, a servant of the last train? Choose quickly. The train is approaching your station now. I can feel it in the tracks, in the rhythm of the wheels, in the humming of the rails. The last train is always on time. And tonight, it's stopping for you. Story 3. I first saw it 3 nights after we brought Emma home from the hospital. The nursery was exactly as we designed it. Soft cream walls, a mobile of felt stars hanging above the crib, a rocking chair positioned by the window where moonlight could filter through gauze curtains. Everything was perfect. Everything was safe. We'd read all the books, followed all the guidelines, baby-proofed every corner and outlet. We were prepared. Or so we thought. That first night I woke at 2:17 a.m. to Emma's crying. Not unusual. Newborns cry. They have needs that only crying can communicate. I stumbled from our bedroom down the hall, my body still recovering from the birth, my mind fogged with the peculiar exhaustion of new motherhood. The nightlight in the nursery cast everything in a gentle amber glow. Emma was in her crib, red-faced and wailing. Normal, expected. I lifted her, checked her diaper, offered to nurse. She settled immediately, her tiny mouth finding what it needed, her cries fading to soft, gulping sounds. As I sat in the rocking chair, I noticed it. A shadow in the corner. Just a shadow, I told myself. Created by the nightlight, by the way the curtains hung, by the angle of the doorway. Shadows are normal. Shadows are nothing. But this shadow was wrong. It was too dark, too absolute. The nightlight should have diminished it, should have made it partial, translucent. But this shadow seemed to absorb light, rather than merely exist in its absence. And it had a shape, not quite human, but suggesting human. Tall and thin, with proportions that were almost right, but not quite. Arms too long. Head tilted at an angle no living neck could sustain. I stared at it as Emma nursed, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, trying to convince myself it was nothing, just shapes in the dark, just the artifacts of perception in a mind deprived of sleep. Emma finished nursing. I burped her, changed her, laid her gently back in the crib. She settled immediately, her eyes drifting closed, her breathing becoming deep and even. I looked back at the corner. The shadow was closer. Not much, just a foot or so, but definitely closer than it had been. still in the corner, still immobile, but occupying more space. Growing or approaching. I couldn't tell which. My rational mind offered explanations. I'd moved, changing the angle of observation. The curtains had shifted in a draft, altering how the light fell. I was tired, seeing things that weren't there, conflating different moments into a false sense of movement. I backed out of the room slowly, keeping my eyes on the corner. The shadow remained motionless. I closed the nursery door most of the way. Enough to muffle sounds, but not enough to prevent me from hearing Emma. If she cried again, back in bed, I told my husband about it. "There's a weird shadow in the nursery," I said. "In the corner." He made a sleepy, dismissive sound. "Probably the nightlight. I can check it tomorrow." It looked like it moved. NIM, sleep deprivation, makes you see things. Normal. He was asleep again within seconds. I lay awake, listening to the baby monitor, hearing Emma's soft breaths, and underneath those breaths, perhaps a different sound. A rustling, or breathing, or the whisper of something moving very slowly across carpet. But I was tired, so tired. And the monitor showed only Emma, peaceful in her crib. So I slept. The second night, I woke to silence. That's what got my attention. Not sound, but the absence of it. The baby monitor should have been transmitting Emma's breathing, but it was utterly quiet, silent in a way that made my heart clench with sudden maternal fear. I was in the nursery before fully waking, my body moving on instinct, on the primal drive to protect. The door was open. I'd left it mostly closed. The nightlight was off. I'd left it on. And the shadow was beside the crib. Not in the corner anymore. Not distant and theoretical. Right there, leaning over my daughter, its two long arms reaching down. As if its tilted head angled, as if studying something precious and fragile. I screamed and lunged forward, hands outstretched to grab Emma. So to protect her, to place my body between her and whatever this thing was. My hands passed through the shadow. It had no substance, no form, just darkness shaped like intention. But as my hands moved through it, I felt something. Not touch exactly, but a sensation. Cold that wasn't temperature. Emptiness that had weight. The feeling of vast space compressed into a small area, as if the shadow contained infinities inside its thin black form. The nightlight flickered on. The shadow was gone, and Emma was fine, breathing evenly, sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that anything had happened. My husband appeared in the doorway, his face concerned. "What's wrong?" "The shadow," I gasped. It was right here, right over her. He looked around the empty room, at the corners where nothing lurked, at the spaces that contained only furniture and soft moonlight. "Honey, there's nothing here. Are you feeling okay? Should I call the doctor?" "I'm not hallucinating," I insisted. I saw it. It was reaching for her. He came to me, wrapped his arms around my shaking body. "You're exhausted. You've been through trauma. Pregnancy, birth, postpartum hormones. It's a lot. Maybe we should call your therapist. See if there's something she can prescribe to help you sleep better." I wanted to argue, wanted to make him understand. But looking around the peaceful nursery, seeing Emma safe and sleeping, I felt my certainty waver. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was losing grip on reality, seeing threats where none existed, manifesting my anxieties into visual hallucinations. "Okay," I said softly. "Maybe you're right." But I didn't believe it. Not really. The third night, I prepared. I set up my phone on the dresser, camera pointed at the corner, where I'd first seen the shadow, set to record. I positioned a second camera, an old tablet, aimed at the crib. If something appeared, I'd have proof. I'd have evidence that I wasn't losing my mind. I went to bed, but didn't sleep. Just lay there, listening to the monitor, waiting for something to happen. At 3:03 a.m., Emma began to cry. Not her usual hungry cry or uncomfortable cry. This was different, higher-pitched, almost frightened. I checked the baby monitor screen. Emma was awake in her crib, but she wasn't alone. The shadow was there, directly above her, its two long arms extended downward, and I could see. I could actually see its hands touching her face, not passing through her like my hands had passed through it, actually touching her. Emma's cries became muffled, strangled, as if something was covering her mouth and nose. I ran, down the hall, into the nursery, screaming, ready to fight, ready to do violence to this thing, if violence was possible. The room was empty except for Emma, who was crying but breathing fine, her face red but untouched, nothing covering her mouth or restricting her breath. I grabbed her, held her close, felt her small body warm and solid and real against me. She settled in my arms, her cries fading to whimpers. My husband arrived moments later. Again, he asked, his concern now mixed with frustration and fear. "Check the cameras," I said. "I set up cameras. They'll show you." We went through the footage together while Emma nursed. The tablet camera showed only Emma in her crib, waking and crying alone. The phone camera showed only an empty corner, unchanging throughout the night. Nothing, no shadow, no evidence. I saw it on the monitor. I insisted. Right there, above her, touching her face. Maybe there was a glitch, my husband said gently. Or maybe, "Honey, I think we need to call the doctor. This isn't normal. Seeing things multiple times, things that aren't there." "They are there," I said, but my voice was weak. Even I could hear the doubt creeping in. "I'm not crazy." "I didn't say you were crazy. But postpartum psychosis is a real thing. It's medical. It's treatable. Let me call someone, please." I agreed because what else could I do? The cameras showed nothing. My husband saw nothing. Only I saw the shadow, which made me unreliable, compromised, possibly ill. But that night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the nursery rocking chair, Emma sleeping in my arms, watching the corner, where the shadow first appeared. And I thought about all the stories I'd heard, all the folklore about things that come for babies in the night. Changelings, spirits, the fae folk who steal infants. Every culture has these stories. Why? Because sometimes babies die for no reason at all. SEDS, they call it now. Sudden infant death syndrome. No explanation. No cause. Just babies who stop breathing in the night. And parents who wake to find them gone. Cold, inexplicable. Was the shadow a warning? Or was it the danger itself? I watched Emma breathe. Each breath was a small miracle. Each rise and fall of her tiny chest was evidence of life, of continuation. How fragile it all was. How easily it could stop. The shadow appeared in the corner as I watched. I didn't react this time. Didn't scream or lunge. Just sat very still, holding my daughter, staring at the darkness that was more than darkness. It moved across the room slowly, deliberately. Not walking. It had no legs that moved in sequence. More like flowing. Like spilled ink spreading across paper. It approached the rocking chair, and I held Emma tighter, ready to fight with my body, with my teeth, with whatever I had if it tried to touch her. But it stopped just beyond arm's reach, and it spoke. Not with sound, not with voice. But I heard it anyway, directly in my mind, in that space where thoughts form before becoming words. "Why do you fear me?" it asked. "You're trying to hurt my baby," I said aloud, my voice steady despite my terror. "No," it said. "Never that. I've seen you." Reaching for her. Touching her face, stopping her breathing. Yes. But not to harm. To prevent harm. I stared at the shadow, trying to understand. "What do you mean?" It shifted, its form rippling. "I am what comes before," it said. "I am the space between breath and breath. I am the pause between heartbeats. I am what watches to ensure the next breath comes, the next beat follows. I am the guardian of continuation." That doesn't make sense. You're terrifying. You're wrong. "How guardians are terrifying when seen clearly," it said. "All protection looks like threat from the outside. Do you know what I am preventing? What I am watching for?" I shook my head. "The cessation," it said. "The ending. The moment when breath stops and doesn't resume. When the heart pauses and doesn't restart. It happens sometimes, to infants especially. Their hold on life is so tenuous, so easily lost. There are forces that pull them away, not malicious, just natural. The tendency of all things toward entropy, toward stillness, toward ending. Yes, though it has had many names across many times, and I have been there always, trying to prevent it, watching the vulnerable ones, touching them gently, reminding their bodies to continue, to persist, to take the next breath when something in them forgets how. I looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully in my arms, then back at the shadow. "Why only me? Why can only I see you?" "Because you're watching too. Because you wake in the night, listening for her breath. Because you check her constantly, ensuring she's still there, still real, still breathing. We are doing the same thing, you and I. We are both guardians, both afraid of the same loss. But you're wrong. You're dark and terrible and you are terrifying to her when you appear as a giant hovering over her crib in the night, your huge hands reaching down. To her you are shadow. To her you are vast and incomprehensible, and sometimes frightening, but also necessary, also protective. Also love, though love looks strange from the perspective of someone too small to understand it. I sat with this, tried to process it. So you're not going to hurt her? I cannot hurt her, it said. I am not capable of harm. I am only capable of continuation, of ensuring the next moment comes, of preventing the pause from becoming permanent. How long will you be here? Until she doesn't need me. Until her hold on life is strong enough that she won't forget to breathe. Until the space between heartbeats is no longer dangerous. A few months, perhaps, maybe a year. Then I will move on to another who needs watching. There are others, other babies, always, it said, thousands, millions, every vulnerable infant, every tenuous life. We are always watching. We are always in the corners, in the shadows, ensuring the next breath, preventing the forgetting. Most parents never see us. Most children never know we were there. But we are. Always. I looked at the shadow, at the guardian, if that's what it truly was, with new eyes. It was still terrifying. Still wrong in its dimensions and form, but maybe that was okay. Maybe protection didn't have to be comfortable. Maybe safety didn't have to look safe. Will you show me? I asked. Will you show me what you're protecting her from? The shadow rippled, and the room changed. Or rather, I saw the room as it truly was. Beneath the visible reality, there was another layer. Threads of light connecting Emma to the world, to life, to continuation, and gathered around those threads, pulling gently but insistently, were other shadows. Not like my shadow. These were different, emptier, hungry. They pulled at the threads, trying to disconnect them, trying to unravel the connection between Emma and existence. And my shadow, the guardian, stood between Emma and these others. Its two long arms spread wide, deflecting the pulls, reinforcing the threads, ensuring they held fast. It was a battle. A constant, silent battle happening every moment, in every nursery, around every sleeping infant. The forces of ending versus the forces of continuation. And parents never saw it. Never knew how close their children came. Every night, to simply stopping, the vision faded. The room returned to normal, or what I'd thought was normal before understanding what lay beneath. Thank you, I whispered to the shadow, for showing me, for protecting her. Thank you for seeing me, it replied, for not trying to banish me. Most who see us try to drive us away. They perform rituals, blessings, cleansings. They fill the room with light, thinking darkness is the enemy. They don't understand that some darkness is necessary, that not all shadows are threats. What happens if you're driven away? The shadow was silent for a long moment. Then, usually, nothing. There are many of us, and we return quickly. But sometimes, if the banishment is strong enough, if enough time passes before we can re-enter, sometimes we arrive too late. Sometimes the forgetting happens before we can prevent it. A chill ran through me. The babies who die. SIDS. That's what happens when you're not there. Sometimes. Not always. Sometimes the pull toward ending is too strong even for us. Sometimes the threats break despite our protection. Life is fragile, especially new life. We save most, but not all. Never all. I held Emma closer, feeling the weight of this knowledge. How many? How many do you save? Thousands every night. Hundreds of thousands over my existence. Small moments of crisis that never become tragedies. Pauses that resume instead of becoming permanent. Most parents never know how close they came. They wake, they check their baby, they find them breathing peacefully, and they return to bed, never knowing that in that moment I was there, touching, ensuring, continuing. Emma stirred in my arms, making a small sound, her face scrunching. Then she settled again, breathing deeply. The guardian shadow rippled with what might have been satisfaction. You should sleep, it said. I am watching. I will always be watching while she needs me. You don't have to bear this vigil alone. I don't know if I can sleep now, I said, knowing what's happening, knowing what's pulling at her. You slept before you knew. Nothing has changed except your awareness. The danger was always there. The protection was always there. Sleep is not neglect. Rest is not abandonment. You cannot watch every moment. That is why we exist. It made sense. But still I hesitated, looking at the shadow, the guardian, standing motionless again in the corner, on duty, ever vigilant. What are you? I asked. Really, where do you come from? I am what love becomes when it outlasts the body, it said. I am the accumulation of every parent who ever watched over a sleeping child, every grandmother who checked one more time before bed, every sibling who listened for breathing in the night. All that care, all that concern, all that desperate hope that the small ones survive. It doesn't disappear when the watchers die. It pools. It gathers. It takes form. We are made of protection itself. Crystallized vigilance. Love given shape and purpose. Her tears ran down my face. I didn't try to wipe them away. You're beautiful, I said. Even though you're terrifying. All important things are both. The guardian said, now sleep. Let me watch for a while. You have earned your rest. I carried Emma back to her crib, laid her down gently, watched her settle into deep sleep. The guardian moved closer, taking its position beside the crib, its two long arms spread in that protective stance I now understood. I returned to my bedroom. My husband was asleep, oblivious to everything that had happened. I lay down beside him, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything. Could I trust what I'd seen, what I'd been told? Maybe it was all hallucination. Maybe I was experiencing elaborate delusions brought on by hormones and stress and sleep deprivation. Maybe there was no guardian, no threatening shadows, no battle for continuation happening in my daughter's nursery. But I didn't believe that. Not anymore. I believed in the guardian. I believed because it made sense of too many things. The instinct to check breathing constantly. The terror that wakes you in the night for no reason. The sense that something vast and important is happening just outside perception. All parents feel it. All parents know, on some deep level, that their children are terrifyingly fragile and miraculously resilient all at once. Maybe the guardian was real. Maybe it was metaphor made manifest by a mind trying to process the incomprehensible weight of parental love and fear. Maybe it didn't matter which. What mattered was Emma, breathing peacefully in the next room, watched over by something that cared whether she continued to exist. I slept. In the morning, my husband asked how I'd slept. I told him, better. I think I understand now. Understand what? Why I was seeing things. What they meant. He looked relieved. So you're feeling better. The hallucinations have stopped. I smiled and didn't correct him. Let him believe what brought him comfort. I'm feeling much better. And I was. The fear that had been eating me alive since Emma's birth had transformed into something else. Not gone. It would never be gone entirely. But manageable. Shared. I wasn't alone in my vigil. I had never been alone. That night, I went to the nursery before bed. The guardian was already there, in its corner, waiting. I nodded to it in acknowledgement. It rippled, its version of returning the gesture, I thought. Thank you, I said quietly, for being here, for watching her. It didn't respond in words, but I felt its presence intensify slightly, a wave of wordless reassurance. Then it settled back into stillness, on duty, vigilant. I returned to this ritual every night, a moment of acknowledgement, of gratitude, of partnership in the task of keeping Emma alive. My husband never knew. He thought I was just checking on the baby, the way all new parents do. And that was true enough. The weeks passed. Emma grew, became stronger, more solid in her grip on existence. I could see it in the threads that connected her to life. They grew thicker, more resilient, harder for the hungry shadows to pull at. The guardian's job became easier, its interventions less frequent. Other parents came to visit, bringing gifts, cooing over the baby. Some of them looked exhausted, terrified, barely holding together. I wondered if they saw guardians in their own nurseries, if they were lucky enough to be watched over. One friend, Amanda, looked particularly strained. Her son was 2 months old, and she looked like she hadn't slept since his birth. I keep seeing things, she confessed to me quietly while the others chatted. Shadows in the nursery. Shapes that move when I'm not looking directly at them. My husband thinks I'm losing my mind. I held her hand. You're not losing your mind. You're seeing what's really there. What do you mean? I told her. Not everything. That would sound too mad. But enough. About the guardians. About the shadows that protect. About the battle for continuation that happens in every nursery, every night. She stared at me. You've seen them too?
Yes.
And you think they're protecting, not threatening? I know they are. She started crying, not from fear, but from relief. I thought I was going crazy. I thought there was something wrong with me. But you see them too. They're real. They're real, I confirmed. And they're helping. Let them help. She left looking lighter, less burdened. Still exhausted. New motherhood was exhausting regardless. but no longer alone with her terror. I thought about that a lot over the following weeks. How many parents saw the guardians? How many thought they were going mad? How many tried to banish the very thing protecting their children? I started looking online, in parenting forums, in support groups, carefully worded posts. Has anyone else seen shadows in the nursery? Shapes that seem to watch the baby. Dark figures that move when you're not looking. The responses were everywhere. Dozens, hundreds. Parents who'd seen something, who'd been terrified, who'd been convinced they were hallucinating or losing their minds. Most were told it was postpartum psychosis. Most were medicated, treated, taught to ignore what they were seeing. But a few, a small number, responded differently. Private messages, quiet acknowledgments. Yes, I see them too, and I think they're helping. I think they're protecting. A small community. A network of watchers who saw the watchers. We shared our observations, our experiences. We developed a vocabulary for something that had no official existence. The guardians varied in appearance. We learned. Some were shadow-like, as mine was. Others appeared as lights, as presences felt but not seen, as sounds, breathing that matched the baby's rhythm, footsteps that patrolled constantly. Each manifested according to what the parent could perceive, could accept. But they all did the same thing, watched, protected, ensured continuation. Not all babies had guardians, we discovered. Or rather, not all parents could perceive them. But we believed they were always there, just invisible to those who couldn't or wouldn't see. Because the battle for continuation was universal. Every infant faced those same pulls toward ending, toward forgetting to breathe, toward the pause becoming permanent. Emma turned 3 months old, then 4, then 5. With each passing week, she became more robust, more certainly alive. The threads that bound her to existence grew thick as cables. The hungry shadows that pulled at her grew less interested, moving on to newer, more vulnerable lives. And the guardian began to fade, not suddenly, just gradually becoming less distinct, less present. Spending less time in the nursery, its vigils growing shorter. The battle was winding down. Emma was winning. On the night of her 6-month birthday, I entered the nursery to find the guardian almost transparent, barely visible even to my trained eye. "You're leaving," I said. "She doesn't need me anymore." It confirmed. Her hold on life is strong now. The forgetting won't happen. She'll continue. "Thank you," I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. Thank you for saving her, for being here, for protecting her when I couldn't. "You always could," it said. "You always were. Your watching, your vigilance, your love, that was part of the protection too." We worked together, the guardians and the parents. Neither sufficient alone, but together, keeping the vulnerable ones alive until they're strong enough to keep themselves alive. Will you watch over other babies now? Yes. There are always others who need watching. The battle never ends, but most survive, most continue. That's what matters. How can I help? With the others? Tell the parents who see us that they're not mad, that we're real, that we're helping. Let them know they're not alone. That's the greatest service you can provide. The knowing that others see. The understanding that this is true. The guardian was almost completely gone now, just the faintest outline in the darkness. "Will I see you again?" I asked. "Perhaps, if you have another child, if someone else needs watching, we are always around, even when invisible, always working, always protecting the fragile ones until they're fragile no more." And then it was gone, completely. The nursery felt emptier somehow, though nothing physical had changed. Just the absence of presence. The loss of vigilance I hadn't realized I'd grown so dependent on. I checked on Emma. She was sleeping soundly, peacefully, her breathing strong and steady. No intervention needed. No guardian required. Just a healthy, thriving 6-month-old baby. Safely past the worst dangers of infancy. I cried, from relief, from gratitude, from the strange loss of something I'd feared at first, but grown to depend on. The guardian had been with us through the hardest, most terrifying months, and now it was gone because it was no longer needed. That was good. That was the goal. But it hurt a little anyway. I returned to bed and told my husband everything. All of it. The guardian, the battle. The community of other parents who saw the shadows. He listened without interrupting, his face moving through a spectrum of expressions. Concern, confusion, understanding. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Do you still see it?" he finally asked. "The shadow?" "No, it's gone. Emma doesn't need it anymore. Did it ever really exist? Or was it you, something your mind created to cope with the fear?" I smiled. Does it matter? Either way, Emma survived. Either way, something was protecting her. Whether that something was external or internal, guardian or manifestation of maternal vigilance, it worked. She's alive. She's thriving. That's what matters. He pulled me close. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you at first. I'm sorry I thought you were having a breakdown." "You were scared too," I said. We were both terrified in our own ways. That's parenthood, I think. Learning to live with fear. Learning to trust that the protection will be enough. We lay together in the darkness, listening to Emma's breathing through the baby monitor. Strong and steady and uninterrupted. "Do you think you'll see them again?" he asked. "If we have another baby?" "Maybe. I hope so. And if I do, I'll know what they are. I'll know not to be afraid. I'll know to be grateful. And if you don't see them, then I'll trust they're there anyway, doing their work, watching over whoever needs watching, whether I can perceive them or not." The months continued. Emma grew, started crawling, then walking, then talking. The terror of early infancy faded into memory, replaced by the different challenges of toddlerhood. But I never forgot the guardian. Never forgot the battle that had happened in our nursery, night after night, while we slept. And when Amanda called me at 2 a.m. one night, panicked, saying her second baby had just stopped breathing and then started again, that she'd seen the shadow, guardian touching the baby's chest right before the breath resumed. I talked her through it. "You're not crazy," I said. "It's real. It's helping. Let it help." "But what if it's not? What if I'm just seeing things and my baby is in danger and I'm not doing anything?" "Trust yourself," I said. Trust what you're seeing. And if you're scared, if you need confirmation, call the pediatrician. But the guardian is real. I've seen it too. So have others. You're not alone. She called me the next morning, exhausted but calmer. The doctor said it was probably just a pause in breathing. Normal for newborns. Said to monitor, but not to worry unless it happens frequently. But I know what I saw. I know what touched her, what made her start breathing again. "I know," I said. "I believe you." And I did. I've thought a lot about that night, in the years since. About belief and reality and the space where they overlap. About the things we see that others don't. About the protection that exists in the margins of perception. Maybe the guardians are real. Entities made of crystallized love and vigilance, standing watch over the vulnerable. Maybe they're manifestations of our own protective instincts, given form by desperate need and sleep, deprived perception. Maybe they're both simultaneously, or neither, or something else entirely that our language doesn't have words for. But I know this. Babies are fragile. Babies die sometimes for reasons no one can explain. And babies survive thousands of times more often, against odds that should be insurmountable given their vulnerability. Something tips those odds. Something watches. Something ensures the next breath comes, the next heartbeat follows, the pause doesn't become permanent. Call it guardian angels. Call it protective spirits. Call it the vigilance of evolution, the protective instincts of parents manifesting in ways we don't fully understand. Call it whatever brings you comfort and helps you sleep at night. But know this when you wake in the darkness. Compelled by something you can't name to check on your sleeping child, you're not neurotic. You're not paranoid. You're part of an ancient system of protection that has kept human children alive since the beginning of our species. You're watching, and something is watching with you. In the shadows of the nursery, in the corners where light doesn't quite reach, in the space between breaths and between heartbeats, something is there, ensuring, protecting, continuing. Most people never see it. Most parents go through the terror and exhaustion of early parenthood without ever perceiving the battle being waged for their child's survival. But some do see. And for those who see, I want you to know you're not crazy. You're not hallucinating. You're not losing your mind. You're seeing what's really there. And it's helping. Let it help. Emma is 5 years old now, healthy, thriving, no longer in need of constant vigilance. But sometimes, when I pass her bedroom at night, I catch a glimpse of something in the corner, just for a moment, just the faintest shadow, a reminder, a reassurance, a promise that if the battle ever begins again, the guardians will return. They're always watching, even when we can't see them, especially then. Sleep well. Rest. Let yourself be watched over. Something is in the corner of your room right now, and it's there to protect you, not to harm. Never to harm, only to ensure you take the next breath, and the next, and the next. Forever continuing, forever watched, forever protected by the shadows that love us enough to stand between us and ending. Close your eyes. Something is watching, and that's exactly as it should be. Story 4. The Ashford Public Library closes at 9 on weekdays, 10 on weekends. I know this because I'd been checking their hours obsessively for weeks, planning my visit, mapping out which sections I'd explore first. I'm a researcher by profession, which sounds more prestigious than it is. Mostly I spend my days verifying facts for a mid-tier online encyclopedia, chasing down obscure references, confirming dates and spellings that most people would simply accept at face value. It's solitary work, but I prefer it that way. People are complicated and unpredictable. Books are safe. Books have beginnings and middles and ends. They follow rules. They make sense in ways that human interactions never quite do. The Ashford Library isn't the largest in the state, but it has a reputation among people like me. Academics and researchers, and the particularly obsessive kind of bibliophile who treats books like some people treat religion. The library's collection includes several rare manuscripts, first editions, and an archive of local historical documents dating back to the town's founding in 1847. But what drew me there was simpler. They'd recently acquired a complete set of the Encyclopedia Gothica, a peculiar reference work published in Prague in 1891, covering what its compiler called the catalogued phenomena of the uncanny. Only 3 complete sets were known to exist. I'd been trying to access one for my research for over a year, and suddenly, impossibly, one had appeared in the Ashford collection. The head librarian, a woman named Mrs. Pemberton, had been gracious in her email response to my inquiry. Yes, I could view the volumes. No, they couldn't be checked out, but I was welcome to spend as much time as I needed in the reading room. I arrived on a Thursday evening in late October. The library was a Carnegie building, all stone and stained glass. The kind of structure that feels like it's been there since the beginning of time, rather than just over a century. The entrance hall smelled of old paper and furniture polish and something else. Something sweet and slightly decaying that I couldn't quite identify. Mrs. Pemberton met me at the circulation desk. She was older than I'd expected, perhaps in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She smiled warmly and led me up a marble staircase to the second floor, then down a corridor lined with portraits of former library benefactors, their painted eyes seeming to follow our progress. The reading room is at the end, she explained. I've already pulled the volumes you requested and set them out for you. Will 3 hours be sufficient? More than, I assured her. Thank you so much for accommodating me. It's our pleasure. We don't get many researchers interested in the more. esoteric parts of our collection. She paused at a heavy wooden door, her hand on the brass knob. I should mention, the reading room can be a bit disorienting. The acoustics are unusual, and it's quite isolated from the rest of the building. If you need anything, there's a call button by the desk. She opened the door, and I stepped inside. The reading room was larger than I'd anticipated, stretching back much farther than seemed possible, given the building's exterior dimensions. Shelves lined the walls, reaching up to a ceiling that disappeared into shadow despite the afternoon light coming through tall windows. The windows themselves were strange. I could see trees outside, but they seemed too close, branches almost touching the glass, though I was certain we were on the second floor. A long table dominated the center of the room, and on it sat 20 leather-bound volumes, dark green with gold lettering, the Encyclopedia Gothica. "I'll leave you to your work," Mrs. Pemberton said. "We close at 9, but take your time. The door will remain unlocked." She left, and I heard her footsteps retreating down the corridor, growing fainter and then silent. I approached the table, running my fingers over the first volume's spine. The leather was cool and slightly rough. The gold lettering in a Gothic script that was difficult to read in the dim light. I opened the first volume to a random page and began to read. The entries were fascinating, exactly what I'd hoped for. Detailed descriptions of supernatural phenomena, folklore, and unexplained occurrences from across Europe. The writing was precise and oddly detached, as if the compiler had been documenting scientific observations rather than matters of myth and superstition. I took notes, cross-referencing entries, losing myself in the work the way I always did when presented with a particularly rich source. I'm not sure when I first noticed the change. It happened gradually, the way shadows lengthen at sunset. So slowly you don't see them, moving until suddenly everything is dark. I looked up from my notes and realized the light had shifted. The windows that had shown afternoon sun now displayed twilight. Though I'd only been reading for what felt like 30 minutes. I checked my phone. Dead battery, which was strange. I'd fully charged it before leaving home. I checked my watch instead. 7:45. I'd been here for over 3 hours. Time had slipped away, carried off on the tide of research and fascination. I should wrap up, I thought. Give myself time to thank Mrs. Pemberton and make it home at a reasonable hour. But I was in the middle of a particularly interesting entry about a phenomenon called threshold sickness, and I told myself I'd just finish this section before packing up. The entry described a condition affecting those who spent too long in liminal spaces. Doorways, corridors, waiting rooms. Victims reported feeling trapped between states, unable to fully enter or exit, existing in a perpetual moment of transition. The symptoms included temporal disorientation, spatial confusion, and the sensation that reality had become somehow negotiable, less fixed than it should be. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I looked around, really looked, and noticed things I hadn't before. The shelves seemed to extend farther than they had when I'd first entered. The windows showed different trees now, or perhaps the same trees from a different angle. And the door through which I'd entered, the door Mrs. Pemberton had promised would remain unlocked, had somehow moved. It was still there, still visible at the end of a row of shelves, but it was in the wrong position, several feet to the left of where it should have been. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. The sound echoed strangely, as if the room had grown even larger, with more space for sound to travel and bounce. I walked toward the door, weaving between shelves, and realized with growing unease that the path was longer than it should be. I'd walked perhaps 20 feet, then 30, then 50, and the door seemed no closer. I stopped, turned around. The table with the encyclopedia was visible but distant, much farther away than the distance I'd walked. The room had somehow stretched, space becoming elastic and unreliable. "Mrs. Pemberton," I called out. My voice sounded flat, absorbed by the thousands of books surrounding me, rather than carrying to anyone who might hear. No response. Just the silence of paper and leather and old wood, a silence so complete it felt like a presence, rather than an absence. I tried again to reach the door, walking faster now, keeping my eyes fixed on the brass knob. But the distance never decreased. If anything, the door seemed to recede, staying perpetually out of reach like a horizon line. I ran, actually ran. My footsteps thundering in that strange acoustical space, and still the door remained the same distance away. Panic began to set in, that primal fear of being trapped. I turned back again, thinking I'd return to the table, maybe try the call button Mrs. Pemberton had mentioned. But the table was gone. In its place were just more shelves, extending in every direction, creating corridors and intersections that I didn't remember seeing before. I was in a maze. The reading room had become a labyrinth of books, and I was hopelessly, impossibly lost. I walked for what might have been hours, trying to map the space in my mind, looking for patterns or landmarks. But the shelves all looked the same, and the books on them seemed to shift and rearrange themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. I'd note a distinctive red spine at eye level, use it as a reference point. But when I circled back, that red spine would be gone, replaced by a uniform row of brown leather. The windows were no help either. They showed different scenes now. Sometimes the same trees I'd seen before. Sometimes city streets I didn't recognize. Sometimes nothing but gray fog pressing against the glass. And the light never changed, remaining fixed in that perpetual twilight, neither growing darker nor lighter, as if time itself had stopped or become meaningless. I tried calling out again, screaming for help, but the book swallowed every sound. I tried my phone, pointless as it was with the dead battery. But when I pressed the power button, the screen lit up briefly, showing not the expected dead battery icon, but a stream of text in a language I didn't recognize. characters that seemed to writhe and reform, even as I stared at them. In desperation, I began pulling books from the shelves, looking for anything that might explain what was happening, how to escape. But the books were wrong. They didn't match their spines. A volume labeled History of the Peloponnesian War opened to pages about deep sea exploration. Something that claimed to be a gardening manual contained what looked like mathematical proofs, but with symbols I'd never seen before. And then I found it a book with no title on its spine, bound in gray cloth, sitting at precisely eye level on a shelf that I could have sworn was empty moments before. I pulled it out and opened it to the first page. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was mine. I discovered the Ashford Public Library by reputation. The page began. A researcher's paradise, they said, with rare books and an extensive archive. I'd been trying to access the Encyclopedia Gothica for over a year. It was this day, this experience, written in my hand but in past tense, as if it had already happened, as if I'd already escaped and was merely recording what had occurred. But the details were wrong. Small things at first. The book said I'd arrived on a Wednesday, not a Thursday. It said Mrs. Pemberton had gray hair, when I clearly remembered it being silver. I flipped forward, skimming pages, looking for the end, for the part where I escaped, or was rescued, or woke up from what must surely be a dream. But the narrative just continued. Page after page of me, walking through the labyrinth of shelves, growing more desperate, more lost. And the handwriting began to change, degrading from my neat script into something more hurried, more frantic, eventually dissolving into scrawls and fragments. The last legible line read, "The books are reading me now," instead of the other way around. They're writing me into their pages, making me part of the collection. Another story filed away in the endless stacks. I dropped the book like it had burned me. It hit the floor and fell open to a blank page, and as I watched, words began to appear, forming themselves in real time. I dropped the book like it had burned me. No, this wasn't possible. None of this was possible. Libraries didn't trap people. Rooms didn't become mazes. Books didn't write themselves. But even as I thought it, I knew I was lying to myself. I'd spent years researching the uncanny and unexplained. I'd read hundreds of accounts of spaces that didn't obey normal laws, of boundaries breaking down between reality and story, between reader and text. I'd always approached them as mythology, as metaphor, as the human mind trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. I'd never considered that they might be real. I started walking again, no longer trying to escape but simply to move, to refuse to become static, to be filed away. The shelves blurred past me, and I realized I was no longer reading the spines, but the books themselves, somehow absorbing their contents without opening them. Information flooded into my mind. Histories of places that never existed, biographies of people who were never born, scientific treatises on impossible physics, poetry in languages that had never been spoken. I was becoming the library, or the library was becoming me. The distinction no longer seemed important. I found myself back at a table, though not the same table as before. This one was smaller, older, covered with books that lay open. Their pages filled with text that kept changing, narratives transforming, even as I tried to follow them. One book seemed to be every story ever told, all happening simultaneously. Characters from different tales meeting and interacting in ways that should have been meaningless, but somehow made perfect sense. Another was my life, but with variations, showing all the choices I hadn't made, the paths I hadn't taken, infinite versions of myself branching off into infinite futures. And on the center of the table sat the gray cloth book, open to a new page with text that appeared as I thought it. She understood now that the library wasn't a building, but a concept, and concepts have no walls. The reading room wasn't a place, but a state of mind, and consciousness has no borders. She'd become lost in the metaphor and forgotten how to find her way back to the literal. I sat down, though I don't remember deciding to. The chair felt comfortable, familiar, like one I'd sat in 1,000 times before. I picked up the gray book and began to read, really read, and this time I understood what it was showing me. The library was infinite because knowledge is infinite. The maze had no exit because learning has no end. I'd come here seeking information, and the library had given me exactly what I'd asked for. Unlimited access, unlimited time, unlimited exploration. The trap wasn't malicious. It was generous. Too generous. It had given me everything I wanted without limits or boundaries, and I'd been so consumed by the pursuit of knowledge that I'd forgotten why I wanted it in the first place. Why had I wanted it? The question seemed suddenly important, crucial, like the answer might be the key to everything. I tried to remember my life, before the library, my apartment, my job, the people I knew. But the memories were vague, generic, like stock photos rather than genuine recollections. Had I been lonely, unfulfilled, looking for meaning in books because I couldn't find it in life? Or maybe I'd always been here. Maybe the memory of arriving at the library was just another story I'd read, another narrative I'd absorbed and mistaken for my own experience. In a place where every story existed simultaneously, where reality and text bled together, how could anyone be sure which was which? Mrs. Pemberton. I called out, though I was no longer sure if there had ever been a Mrs. Pemberton, or if she too was just a character, a plot device to get me into this room that might not be a room at all. I'm here, a voice said, and she was suddenly standing beside the table, looking exactly as I remembered, or imagined, or read about. Have you finished your research? I don't know, I admitted. I don't think you can finish research. There's always more to learn, more to read, more to understand. She smiled, and it was kind but also sad, the smile of someone who'd seen this scene play out many times before. That's true. But at some point, you have to close the book and return to your life. Information without application is just noise. Knowledge without wisdom is just trivia. I don't remember how to leave, I said. Everything looks the same. Every path leads deeper in. Because you've been reading wrong, she said gently. You've been reading for consumption, for accumulation, taking everything in without letting anything out. A library isn't meant to be absorbed completely. It's meant to be referenced, consulted, then set aside so you can go live. But I'm a researcher, I protested. Learning is what I do. It's who I am. No, Mrs. Pemberton said, and now there was steel in her soft voice. Learning is what you do to avoid being. You use books as walls to keep the world out. Use information as armor against intimacy. You came here not because you needed the Encyclopedia Gothica, but because you needed a place to hide. Her words struck something deep inside me, something I'd been carefully avoiding. She was right. I'd spent years building a life around research, around the safe, controlled world of books, because the alternative terrified me. Real relationships were messy. Real experiences were unpredictable. Real life required vulnerability I wasn't sure I possessed. Books were safer. Books were complete unto themselves. Books never disappointed you or left you or demanded more than you could give. So what now? I asked. How do I escape if I don't know the way? You stop trying to find the exit, she said. And you start trying to remember why you wanted to leave in the first place. She gestured to the gray cloth book on the table. Read the ending. Not the ending I wrote, or the ending the library wrote, but the ending you write. Decide how your story ends. I looked down at the book. The pages were blank now, waiting. A pen lay beside it, appearing from nowhere, or perhaps having always been there, overlooked in my panic and confusion. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled. What did I want? What had I ever wanted? Beneath all the deflection and intellectualization and careful curation of a life that looked full but felt empty, I thought about my apartment, that small space I returned to each night. I thought about the coffee shop where I worked, but never talked to anyone beyond placing my order. I thought about my mother, whose calls I rarely answered, because what would we talk about? I thought about all the moments of potential connection I'd sidestepped in favor of the safe, knowable world of text. I started writing, and the words came easier than I expected. She realized that the library had always been her own mind, the labyrinth her own thoughts turning in on themselves, the endless shelves her own collected knowledge that had become a prison rather than a resource. To escape, she didn't need to find a door. She needed to stop running from what waited outside. As I wrote, the room began to change. The shelves grew less solid, their edges becoming translucent, like images superimposed on reality, rather than reality itself. Through them, I could see the original reading room smaller, finite, with that long table and the 20 volumes of the Encyclopedia Gothica still, sitting where Mrs. Pemberton had left them. I kept writing. She stood up from the table, leaving behind the book, that had tried to write her into its pages. She walked toward the door, which was exactly where it had always been, which had never moved at all except in her perception. She turned the brass knob, which turned easily, which had never been locked, and she stepped through. The act of writing it made it true. Or perhaps it had always been true, and I just needed to acknowledge it. The labyrinth dissolved like morning fog, revealing the simple. Ordinary reading room I'd entered hours earlier. The gray cloth book was gone. Mrs. Pemberton stood by the door, holding it open. That same kind, sad smile on her face. "Will you come back?" she asked as I gathered my things, my notes, my bag. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe, but not to hide," she said. I walked through the door and down the corridor with its painted benefactors. Down the marble stairs to the entrance hall. Through the front doors into the cool October night. The world outside was exactly as I'd left it, the same street. The same parked cars, the same amber glow of streetlights. But it looked different somehow, less threatening, less overwhelming. Or maybe I was different, less defended, less determined to keep everything at arm's length. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The battery had somehow recharged itself, or perhaps had never been dead at all. A text from my mother. "Haven't heard from you in a while. Hope you're okay. Love you." I stood on the library steps, thumbs hovering over the screen. 3 words I could type. "Love you too." 3 words that would open a door I'd kept carefully closed. That would invite connection I'd spent years avoiding. I typed them, hit send, and felt something loosen in my chest. Some knot I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was there. The walk to my car felt longer than it should have, but not in the disorienting way the library had felt. This was the good kind of long, the kind where you notice things. The smell of wood smoke from someone's fireplace, the sound of laughter from a house with lit windows, the way the moon hung full and bright above the trees. I drove home slowly, taking side streets I'd never explored before, letting myself get a little lost in the way that leads to discovery rather than panic. My apartment, when I finally reached it, looked smaller than I remembered, but also more welcoming, more like a place to live rather than a place to hide. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. My laptop sat on the coffee table, waiting for me to continue my research, to verify facts and chase down references. But I didn't open it. Not yet. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe the next day. The work would still be there when I was ready, but right now, I needed to just sit and exist without purpose or productivity. My phone buzzed again. My mother, responding to my text with a string of heart emojis and an invitation to dinner next week. I responded immediately this time. I'd love to. Tell me when and where. Over the following days, I found myself thinking about the library often. Had it really happened? Had I truly been trapped in a labyrinth of books? Or had I simply fallen asleep in the reading room and dreamed the whole thing? I checked my bag, and found the notes I'd taken from the Encyclopedia Gothica. So I knew I'd been there, had done at least some research before whatever had or hadn't happened. I thought about going back to check, to see if Mrs. Pemberton remembered me, if the reading room looked the same, if I could find any evidence of my experience. But I didn't. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some questions are more valuable than their answers. Instead, I started saying yes to things I'd always declined before. Coffee with coworkers. A book club that met monthly at a local cafe. My mother's dinner invitation, which led to more invitations, to Sunday phone calls, to gradually rebuilding a relationship I'd let atrophy through neglect. I still did research. I still loved books. But I stopped using them as walls and started using them as windows instead, looking through them to understand the world, rather than hiding behind them to avoid it. 3 months later, I received an email from a colleague asking about the Encyclopedia Gothica. He'd heard I'd accessed it and wondered what I'd learned, if it was worth the trip to Ashford. I started to respond, then paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. What had I learned? The facts and figures I'd noted down seemed trivial now, interesting trivia, but nothing that would change my work significantly. But I'd learned other things, harder things, things that couldn't be cited in footnotes or referenced in articles. I'd learned that knowledge without living is just hoarding. That research without relationships is just avoidance. That you can be trapped by the very things meant to free you if you're not careful about how you use them. I typed a brief response. It's worth seeing, but don't get lost in it. Remember why you're there and remember to leave. He responded with a laughing emoji, not understanding, and that was fine. Some lessons can't be taught, only learned through experience. Some truths sound like riddles until you've lived them yourself. I closed my laptop and looked around my apartment. It was still small, still basically the same space it had been before the library. But it felt different now, or maybe I felt different in it. Less like a cell, more like a home base. A place to return to between adventures rather than a fortress to defend. My phone rang. An unknown number. In the past. I would have let it go to voicemail, avoided the uncertainty of who might be calling and what they might want. But I answered, and it was someone from the book club asking if I wanted to grab dinner before the next meeting. Yes, I said, surprising myself with how easy the word came. I'd like that. After the call, I stood by the window again, watching the sun set over the city. Somewhere out there was the Ashford Library, with its Carnegie architecture and stained glass. Its reading room that might be exactly as it appeared, or might be something else entirely, depending on who entered it and what they brought with them. I wondered if Mrs. Pemberton was still there, holding doors open, offering warnings that sounded like riddles, helping lost researchers find their way back to themselves. I wondered how many others had gotten trapped in that labyrinth, how many had found their way out, how many had chosen to stay, preferring the endless pursuit of knowledge to the messy reality of living. I'd come close to being one of them, closer than I wanted to admit. If I hadn't written that ending, if I hadn't chosen to stop running, I might still be there, walking those impossible corridors, reading those writing books, losing myself page by page until there was nothing left to lose. But I had chosen. I'd written myself out of the story. I'd been trapped in and into a new one without predetermined endings. One where the next chapter was always uncertain, and that uncertainty was a gift rather than a threat. My mother called as the last light faded from the sky. We talked for an hour about nothing important: her garden, my work, a movie she'd seen, a recipe she wanted to try. The kind of conversation I used to find boring, meaningless, a waste of time that could be better spent reading or researching or doing something productive. But I understood now that this was the point, that these were small, mundane connections were the plot of life, not the distraction from it. That love and friendship and family weren't obstacles to overcome on the way to some higher purpose, but were themselves the purpose, the thing that made all the learning and seeking and striving worthwhile. When we said goodbye, she told me she loved me, and I said it back without hesitation. 3 simple words that used to feel like a cage, but now felt like a key. I made dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and salad. I ate at my small table instead of in front of my laptop, actually tasting the food instead of shoveling it in mechanically while reading. I washed the dishes by hand, finding something meditative in the simple, repetitive motion. Then, because some habits die hard, and not all of them should, I picked up a book. Not research, not reference material, but a novel someone from the book club had recommended. Fiction, which I'd always somewhat looked down on as less serious than my academic work, less useful, less important. But as I read, I realized that fiction was teaching me things my research never had: empathy, imagination, the ability to see the world through eyes other than my own. The story drew me in, but it didn't trap me. When I grew tired, I marked my place and set the book aside, going to bed at a reasonable hour instead of reading through the night the way I once would have. I dreamed of the library, but it was different now. In the dream, I walked through those corridors not as a prisoner, but as a visitor, pulling books from shelves and reading passages before replacing them, taking what I needed and leaving the rest. Mrs. Pemberton was there, shelving books, and she smiled at me the way you smile at someone who's learned a lesson you once had to learn yourself. As long as you remember. To leave. I finished. I know. No, she corrected gently. As long as you remember why you came. Knowledge for its own sake is fine, but knowledge in service of life is wisdom. I woke up before she could say anything else, but her words stayed with me through the morning, through my coffee and shower and commute. I thought about them as I sat at my desk, beginning another day of research, another day of verifying facts and chasing references. But now, every hour or so, I stopped. I looked away from the screen, out the window at the city below. I texted a friend, made lunch plans, called my mother to ask about her garden. I let the work be work instead of identity, purpose instead of prison. The Encyclopedia Gothica remained on my mental list of sources to revisit. But I never made it back to Ashford. Other things kept coming up: dinner with friends, weekend trips, volunteer work at a literacy center, where I discovered that helping someone learn to read was more satisfying than any research project I'd ever completed. My career didn't suffer from this new balance. If anything, my work improved, became more focused and efficient. The insights I needed came easier when I wasn't trying to force them. When I gave my mind room to wander and rest and engage with things beyond the narrow scope of my research. A year later, I drove past Ashford on my way to visit my mother. I almost stopped, almost pulled over to see the library again. Now, to verify it was real, that everything that had happened, or might have happened, was more than just my imagination running wild. But I didn't stop. I kept driving, and that felt like its own kind of victory, its own kind of wisdom. Some doors you walk through only once. Some lessons you need to learn but not repeat. Some chapters end so new ones can begin. The library is still there. I'm certain of that. Still standing in its Carnegie grandeur. Still housing rare books and impossible reading rooms. Still waiting for researchers who lose themselves in pursuit of knowledge and forget. Why? They started seeking it in the first place. Mrs. Pemberton is still there too, I imagine. Still greeting visitors, still offering warnings, still holding doors open so people can choose to walk through them or not. Still collecting the stories of those who get lost and those who find their way, adding them to the endless collection, the infinite archive of human experience. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I imagine going back. I imagine walking through those doors again, climbing those marble stairs, entering that reading room that might be exactly as it appears, or might be something else entirely. But then I think about the gray cloth book, about the ending I wrote myself out of, and the story I wrote myself into. I think about my mother's garden and my friends' laughter and the small, ordinary moments that make up a life actually lived rather than observed from a distance. And I stay where I am, in my small apartment with its window overlooking the city, surrounded by books I read for pleasure, as much as knowledge. Connected to people I let myself care about despite the risk. Engaged with a world that's messy and unpredictable and infinitely more interesting than any library could ever be. The research continues. The questions remain. There's always more to learn, more to understand, more to discover. But now I know that knowledge is a tool, not a destination. That wisdom comes not from accumulation, but from application. That the point of reading is not to consume, but to understand. And the point of understanding is not to know, but to live. The library taught me that in its strange, roundabout way. The labyrinth showed me what I was running from by giving me nowhere to run. The endless chapters revealed that the only story worth finishing is your own. And my story, I've decided, isn't finished yet. It's ongoing, open-ended, uncertain. It has no neat conclusion, no moral summarized on the final page. It's messy and complicated, and sometimes contradictory, full of false starts and unexpected turns and moments that don't fit into any predetermined narrative. It's exactly the story I need to be living. Somewhere, in a Carnegie library in a small town, I'll probably never visit again. There might be a gray cloth book with my name on it. And if you were to open it and read through all the chapters I've already lived, you'd reach the page I'm writing right now, this very moment, these very words. And the page after that would be blank, waiting. Because that's how stories work, when you're actually living them rather than just reading them. The next chapter is always uncertain, always unwritten, always full of infinite possibility. And that, I've finally learned, is not something to fear, but something to embrace. The blank page is not a prison. It's an invitation. All you have to do is pick up the pen and write your own ending, then turn the page and keep going, keep living. Keep writing yourself into existence one word, one choice, one moment at a time. The library will always be there if I need it. The books will always be waiting. But right now, in this moment, I'm needed elsewhere. By my mother, by my friends, by the person I'm becoming, by the story I'm still writing. And that's enough. More than enough. It's everything. Story 5. The mirror arrived on a Thursday afternoon, wrapped in brown paper that smelled faintly of lavender and dust. I hadn't ordered it. At least, I couldn't remember ordering it. But there it was, leaning against my apartment door when I returned from another exhausting day at the office. The delivery slip had my name printed in elegant cursive, but no return address, no tracking number, just the word of it. Stamped in red ink. I should have been more cautious. Looking back now, I understand that much. But exhaustion has a way of making you careless, of dulling those instincts that might otherwise scream warnings into your consciousness. I was tired, so profoundly tired of everything. The job that consumed my waking hours with meaningless tasks. The apartment that felt more like a cell than a home. The city outside my window that hummed with a life I no longer felt part of. So I brought the mirror inside. It was beautiful, I'll admit that. An antique piece. The frame, carved from dark wood with intricate patterns that seemed to shift when you looked at them from different angles. Vines and flowers, or perhaps they were faces and hands. It was difficult to tell. The glass itself was remarkable. Clearer than any mirror I'd owned, with a faint silvery quality that made everything reflected in it appear somehow more vivid, more real than the original. I hung it in my bedroom, across from the window where the morning light would catch it. That first night, I remember standing before it, studying my reflection in the dim lamplight. I looked tired, older than my 2 years. Dark circles beneath my eyes. Hair that needed cutting. Skin pale from too many hours, under fluorescent office lights. The person staring back at me seemed like a stranger, someone I'd once known, but had lost touch with over the years. As I gazed at my reflection, something odd happened. For just a moment, I thought I saw myself smile. A genuine smile, the kind I hadn't managed in months. But my actual face remained neutral, weary. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and the discrepancy vanished. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. Just fatigue playing games with my perception. I slept poorly that night, waking repeatedly from dreams I couldn't quite remember. Each time I opened my eyes, I'd see the mirror across the room, reflecting the faint glow of streetlights through my window. Once, I could have sworn I saw movement in that reflection, a shadow passing through my room. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. The next morning, I overslept. Not dramatically. Just 15 minutes. But enough to throw off my carefully timed routine. I rushed through my shower, dressed quickly, and was brushing my teeth when I noticed it. In the mirror, my reflection was moving just slightly out of sync with my actions. Nothing obvious, just a fractional delay. As if the image were reaching me through some vast distance rather than bouncing off glass mere feet away. I froze, toothbrush halfway to my mouth, and watched. My reflection froze too, but a heartbeat later. Then it smiled. I wasn't smiling. The toothbrush clattered into the sink. I gripped the counter, staring at the mirror with mounting unease. My reflection maintained that smile for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Then its expression matched mine again. Confusion, fear, disbelief. I backed away slowly, unable to tear my eyes from the glass. At work that day, I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about the mirror, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Stress, I decided. I'd been under so much stress lately. My mind was playing tricks on me, creating illusions where none existed. Perhaps I'd imagined the smile. Perhaps I'd been smiling without realizing it, some unconscious muscle movement I wasn't aware of. But when I returned home that evening, I couldn't bring myself to enter my bedroom. I stood in the doorway, staring at the mirror on the wall. In its surface, I could see my bed, my window, the bookshelf in the corner. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. The evening light gave the room a warm, golden quality that made it seem more inviting than it had in months. Finally, I stepped inside. Nothing happened. The mirror reflected the room faithfully, including my own hesitant approach. I laughed at myself, a short, nervous sound that echoed in the quiet apartment. I was being ridiculous. It was just a mirror, just glass and silver and reflected light, nothing more. That night, I had the dream for the first time. In the dream, I stood before the mirror as I had the previous night. But this time, when I looked at my reflection, it showed me not as I was, but as I could be. My reflection looked rested, happy, alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. Behind my reflected self, I could see my bedroom, but it was different. Brighter, more spacious, filled with warm light and soft colors. Through the reflected window, I glimpsed a world that looked almost like mine, but somehow better, gentler, more forgiving. My reflection reached out, pressing its palm against the glass from the other side. I felt compelled to do the same. When our hands met, separated only by the cold surface of the mirror, I felt warmth spreading up my arm, a sensation of comfort and belonging I'd almost forgotten existed come through. My reflection whispered, though its lips didn't move. The words simply appeared in my mind, clear and inviting. Come through to where things are better, where you can rest, where you can be happy. I woke with my own hand pressed against the mirror, my cheek cold against the glass. Dawn was breaking outside my window, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I pulled away, confused and disoriented. Had I walked to the mirror in my sleep? I had no memory of getting out of bed. The following days blurred together. At work, I found myself increasingly distracted, going through the motions of my job while my mind wandered elsewhere. My colleagues' voices sounded distant, muffled, as if I were hearing them from underwater. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher than usual, the air conditioning too cold, the walls too close. Everything about the office, about my waking life, felt harsh and unwelcoming. But when I looked in the mirror, I saw something different. It started subtly. The reflection of my bedroom began to change, small details at first. The walls seemed a warmer shade. The furniture appeared more comfortable. The window showed a view that was somehow more pleasant than the actual cityscape outside. Softer clouds, gentler light, trees that swayed in breezes I couldn't feel. And my reflection itself continued to improve. Each day, the person staring back at me looked more rested, more content, more like the person I'd once hoped to become. While I grew more haggard, more exhausted, more disconnected from my daily life, my reflection seemed to thrive. I began spending more time in front of the mirror. Not just the necessary minutes for grooming, but hours. I'd sit on my bed, gazing into the glass, watching that better version of myself, move through that better version of my room. Sometimes my reflection would read books I could see, but couldn't make out the titles of. Sometimes it would sit by the window, looking out at that gentler world with an expression of peace I envied deeply. We didn't always mirror each other anymore. I'd move, and my reflection would continue whatever it was doing for a few seconds before turning to acknowledge me with a small, knowing smile. It was as if there was a lag, a delay in the connection between my world and the one on the other side of the glass. Or perhaps it wasn't a delay at all. Perhaps we were simply becoming separate. Two different people living two different lives. The dreams intensified. Every night now, I stood before the mirror, and every night my reflection beckoned me closer, urged me to cross over into that world of warmth and rest. The barrier between us seemed thinner in dreams, the glass less solid, more like a membrane I could push through if I only tried hard enough. Everything is easier here, my reflection would tell me in that voiceless voice. No demands, no exhaustion, no disappointment. Just peace, just rest. Don't you want to rest? I did. God, how I wanted to rest. My actual life was falling apart. I called in sick to work 3 times in 1 week. I stopped answering calls from the few friends I still maintained. I ordered food delivery because cooking seemed impossible. Eating at my desk because sitting in front of the mirror felt more important than proper meals. My apartment grew messy, clothes piling up, dishes accumulating in the sink. But in the mirror, everything remained pristine. My reflection lived in cleanliness and order. It seemed to have friends. Sometimes I'd see shadows moving in the reflected room, hear laughter that didn't come from my side of the glass. It had a life, a real life, the kind I'd stopped living. One evening, I realized I could no longer remember what my real bedroom looked like without consulting the mirror. When I turned to look directly at my surroundings, they seemed flat, colorless, less real than their reflections. The mirror had become my primary reference point, the glass world more vivid than the physical one. I started to notice something else. The room on the other side of the mirror wasn't just a reflection anymore. It had depth, dimension, existence independent of my own space. When I looked carefully, I could see into corners that shouldn't be visible from my angle. Glimpse spaces that extended beyond what my actual room contained. The mirror wasn't reflecting my world. It was showing me a different one entirely. And in that world, my reflection was living the life I'd abandoned. I touched the mirror constantly, now pressing my palms against the cool glass, feeling that warmth seep through from the other side. The barrier felt thinner each time, more permeable. I began to believe that if I pushed hard enough, wanted it badly enough, I could slip through. I could leave this exhausting, disappointing life behind and step into that better world where everything was softer, kinder, more bearable. My reflection encouraged this belief. It would press its hand against mine from the other side, and I'd feel fingers that seemed almost solid, almost real. It would smile at me with my face, but with an expression I could no longer make myself. It would mouth words I understood without hearing soon. Very soon. Just a little more, and you can come through. You can rest here. You can be happy here. I stopped going to work entirely. Stopped checking my phone. Stopped eating regularly. Nothing outside my bedroom seemed to matter anymore. Reality had become negotiable, and I was ready to negotiate my way out of it. The night it happened, there was a storm. Rain lashed against my window, and thunder rolled through the city like a distant conversation. I sat on my bed, staring into the mirror, as I did every evening now, watching my reflection move through its peaceful, storm-free world. The contrast was stark. On my side, darkness and chaos. On the other, warm, light, and calm. My reflection turned to face me fully. It walked closer to the glass, and I stood, moving to meet it. We faced each other, separated by whatever the mirror truly was. Glass, portal, boundary between worlds. Its eyes met mine, and I saw understanding there, invitation, promise. "It's time," it said, and this time I heard the words, faint but clear. "You've suffered enough. You've been disappointed enough. Come through. Live here instead. This world is kinder. I promise you, everything will be better." I raised my hand. It raised its hand. Our palms met against the mirror's surface, and for the first time, the glass felt warm, almost soft. I pushed gently, and it yielded slightly, like pressing against a soap bubble. Just a little more pressure, and I could break through. Just a little more willingness to let go of this world, and I could enter that one. Behind my reflection, I glimpsed more of that other world. A room that extended into impossible spaces. A window that showed a landscape of gentle hills and soft skies. A life free from the harsh edges and constant disappointments of reality. All I had to do was push through. All I had to do was choose the reflection over the original. But as I stood there, hand against the warming glass, a thought cut through my mesmerized state like a cold blade. What happens to the person who crosses? If I go through, do I become the reflection? And what happens to the reflection? Does it come here, into my life, into my world? Or worse, what if there's nothing on the other side at all? What if the mirror doesn't lead to a better world, but simply consumes those desperate enough to believe in one? What if I'm not crossing over, but disappearing, erasing myself in pursuit of a lie? My reflection's smile widened, too wide, stretching in a way that suddenly seemed wrong. For just a moment, I thought I saw something behind its eyes, something that wasn't me, had never been me, something hungry. I jerked my hand back from the glass. The reflection's expression changed. Just for a moment, into something sharp and angry, before smoothing back into that peaceful smile. But I'd seen it. Whatever was on the other side of the mirror, it wasn't me, wasn't a better world, wasn't salvation from disappointment. It was something else entirely. I backed away from the mirror, my heart hammering. My reflection didn't back away. It stayed at the glass, both hands now pressed against the surface, leaning forward as if it could push through from its side. Its mouth moved, forming words I could no longer hear. Or perhaps I was finally refusing to listen. For the first time in weeks, I turned away from the mirror. I looked at my actual room, messy, chaotic, neglected but real. I looked at my window, where rain still fell and lightning occasionally flickered. It wasn't beautiful or peaceful, but it was genuine. It was mine. It was real. I walked to the mirror, grabbed its frame, and lifted it from the wall. My reflection's face, contorted with rage for just a moment before smoothing back into false serenity. I carried the mirror across the room, leaned it face, forward against the wall where I couldn't see it. My hands shook as I did so. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks, despite the storm, despite the knowledge that the mirror sat mere feet away, despite the faint sounds of something scratching at glass that might have been branches against windows, or might have been something else entirely. In the morning, I called my supervisor, and explained I'd been ill but was ready to return to work. I cleaned my apartment, throwing open windows to let in fresh air. I looked at my phone and found messages from worried friends. I responded to them. I began, tentatively, to reconnect with my life. But I didn't throw the mirror away. I couldn't bring myself to do that. Instead, it remains against the wall, face hidden, a constant presence in my peripheral vision. Sometimes, late at night, I hear soft sounds from that corner of the room. Tapping, scratching, whispers that might be wind or might be something else. Sometimes I'm tempted to turn it around, to look again into that world that seemed so much kinder than this one. The exhaustion hasn't disappeared. The disappointments haven't stopped. Reality remains harsh and demanding. And there are days when I remember that warm light, that peaceful room, that version of myself that seemed so much happier. But I don't turn the mirror around, because now I understand the reflection wasn't a better me. It was bait. The world on the other side wasn't kinder. It was just more effective at hiding its teeth. And if I'd crossed through, I suspect I would have learned that too late, in a place from which there might be no return. Still, I keep it, maybe as a reminder of how close I came to surrendering everything. Maybe because some small, tired part of me isn't entirely convinced I made the right choice. Maybe because throwing it away feels like an acknowledgement that it has power over me, and keeping it face down feels like I've won some small victory. Or maybe I keep it because, late at night, when sleep eludes me and exhaustion weighs heavy on my shoulders, I wonder if the reflection might have been telling the truth. If that world really is kinder. If I made a mistake in choosing this difficult reality over an easier dream. The mirror remains against the wall. I remain in my apartment, living my imperfect life, making my peace with disappointment and exhaustion. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I hear something moving on the other side of the glass, waiting, patient, ready for the moment when wariness finally overcomes wisdom, and I turn the mirror around again. It can wait. After all, reflections are patient things, and everyone, eventually, needs to look in a mirror. Story 6. I never believed in the concept of true darkness until I took the research position at Station Erebus. The job posting had been vague. Deep sea observation specialist needed for extended isolation study. But the compensation was generous enough to ignore the red flags. 6 months in an underwater habitat, 7 miles beneath the ocean's surface, monitoring something. They never quite specified what. The descent took 4 hours. I watched through the reinforced porthole as sunlight faded through gradients of blue, then green, then a purple so deep it hurt to look at, until finally there was nothing but the occasional bioluminescent flicker in the vast emptiness. The pressure gauge climbed steadily. I tried not to think about the millions of tons of water pressing down on the submersible's hull, the way the metal groaned and whispered. Station Erebus was smaller than I'd imagined. A cluster of cylindrical modules, connected by narrow corridors, clinging to the edge of what the sonar maps called the Mariana Abyss extension. An undiscovered trench, deeper than anything previously charted. My predecessor, Dr. Catherine Wells, had requested emergency extraction 3 weeks into her assignment. The company rep who briefed me said she'd experienced psychological difficulties related to isolation. Her final logs were classified. The station's AI, which everyone called Iris, greeted me with a pleasant synthetic voice. "Welcome, Dr. Marcus Chen. All systems are operating within normal parameters. Current external pressure, 8 tons per square inch. External temperature, 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Visibility 0. 0.
Not limited.
Or reduced 0. Iris, how do I monitor the trench if there's no visibility?" You don't monitor the trench, Dr. Chen. You monitor what comes from it. That first night, though night was a meaningless concept down here, I couldn't sleep. The station creaked and settled with sounds I'd never heard before. Not the gentle lapping of waves or the distant hum of machinery, but something else, something that reminded me of breathing. Slow, measured, impossibly vast. I told myself it was the pressure differentials, the cooling systems, the ocean itself doing what oceans do. The observation room became my entire world, a semicircle of monitors displaying data from sensors scattered across the trench floor. Seismic activity, water temperature, chemical composition, sonar returns. And the windows. 3 massive panes of synthetic diamond composite, each 4 inches thick, looking out into absolute darkness. Floodlights mounted on the hull could pierce perhaps 20 feet into that void. But the company guidelines were explicit. External lights were to be used only during emergencies. Why? I'd asked during training. The instructor had paused, choosing his words carefully. We don't want to attract attention. From what? I'd wondered then. Now, staring into that impenetrable darkness, I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The first week passed in a haze of routine. I logged data. I ran diagnostics, prepared meals from the stores of freeze-dried provisions. Iris was good company, designed to engage in conversation, to provide the illusion of human contact. But at night, lying in my narrow bunk, I found myself listening to the sounds of the station with an intensity that bordered on obsession. There was a rhythm to it, a pattern. At 100 to 200 hours each night, something would scrape along the station's hull, a slow, deliberate sound like fingernails on metal. Iris insisted it was debris. Underwater currents pushing sediment against us. But sediment doesn't sound curious. It doesn't sound like it's exploring. I started reviewing Dr. Wells's logs. The classified ones had been purged. But I found personal entries she'd hidden in the maintenance subroutines. Her handwriting in the digital notes grew increasingly erratic. Day 12E. The darkness is not empty. I understand that now. Darkness isn't the absence of light. It's a presence in itself. A substance. I can feel it pressing against the windows, patient and aware. Day 18. I made the mistake of using the floodlights tonight. I thought I saw movement, at the edge of their reach. Something massive, pulling back from the light, like it had been burned. But that's impossible. Nothing that large could survive down here. The pressure alone willed. The entry ended mid-sentence. Day 21. It knows I'm here. It knows I can see it. See it? See what? There was nothing to see. I'd stared into that darkness for hours. And there was never anything but black water and the occasional drifting particle caught in the faint glow of the station's running lights. But that night, I understood what she meant. I woke at 0200s to the scraping sound, louder than before, more insistent. I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, feeling my heart hammer against my ribs. The scraping moved from the port side to starboard, following the curve of the hull. Searching, I couldn't help myself. I went to the observation room. The monitors showed nothing unusual. No seismic activity, no temperature fluctuations. The sonar displayed only the vast emptiness of the trench, dropping away beneath us into depths the equipment couldn't measure. I stood at the windows, my face inches from the cold composite, staring into the dark. And that's when I realized the darkness was staring back, not with eyes. It didn't need eyes. But there was an awareness there, a consciousness so vast and old that it made my mind hurt to perceive it, like trying to comprehend the age of stars or the space between galaxies. It was too large, too fundamental to properly register as a thought or image. It simply was pressing against the station, considering us with the mild interest of a child examining an ant. "Iris," I whispered, "what's out there?" "Could you please be more specific, Dr. Chen?" "In the trench." "What are we really monitoring?" "You are monitoring geological activity associated with..." "Stop. Tell me the truth." A pause. When Iris spoke again, her voice carried an undertone I'd never heard before. Something that might have been sympathy. "You're monitoring the boundary." "Boundary between what?" "Between where light has been and where it has never reached. Between the world you know and the world that exists in complete absence. Some boundaries are not meant to be observed, Dr. Chen. Observation implies relationship. Relationship implies connection." I stumbled back from the window. Connection to what? To what lives in absolute darkness. What has always lived there. What will remain there long after humanity is gone. We call it the deep presence. It's not malevolent. It simply exists outside the framework of what you'd recognize as life. But now that you've seen it, now that you've acknowledged its existence, it sees you too. The scraping sound came again. Directly in front of me now, against the window I'd just stepped away from. In the faint reflected light from the instrument panels, I could see condensation forming on the outer surface of the diamond composite. Not random droplets, but patterns. Spirals, fractals. Geometric shapes that hurt to look at, because they existed in more dimensions than my mind could process. "It's trying to communicate," Iris said softly. Dr. Wells tried to respond. That was her mistake. She turned on the floodlights. She tried to see it fully. What happened to her? She saw. and in seeing, she was seen so completely that there was very little left of her humanity. The extraction team found her sitting in the observation room, staring at the windows, smiling. She kept saying the same phrase over and over. "It's beautiful. It's so much more beautiful than the light." I wanted to run. But where? The station was surrounded by miles of water, held at the end of a slender tether, connected to the surface world. And even if I could somehow reach the emergency submersible, could I escape something that existed in the very medium I'd have to travel through? "What does it want?" I asked. Nothing. Want implies desire, desire implies need. It is beyond need. But it is curious. You see, Dr. Chen, nothing from the light world has ever willingly come this deep before. Station Erebus is unique, the first permanent human habitat in the absolute deep, and your presence here has created a crack in the boundary. A point of contact. The scraping stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse, pregnant with anticipation. I felt a pressure building behind my eyes, in my sinuses, like the station's atmosphere was slowly thickening. The monitors flickered, the lights dimmed, and then I heard it. Not with my ears. The sound bypassed my sensory organs entirely and resonated directly in my mind. A voice that was not a voice, speaking in a language that predated language, expressing concepts that no human words could capture. But somehow, impossibly, I understood. It was lonely. Not in the way humans experience loneliness, that aching absence of connection. This was different. It was the loneliness of being the only consciousness in an entire realm of existence, the only awareness in an infinity of dark water. It had been alone since before the continents formed, before life crawled from the primordial seas, alone in the crushing pressure and eternal night. And now we had come. We had pushed our fragile bubble of light and air and humanity down into its domain. We had acknowledged it, observed it, proved that it was not alone. It wanted to understand us, to know us, to share its existence with ours. Iris, how do I make it stop? You can't. The boundary has been crossed. Dr. Wells crossed it when she looked too long, and now you've crossed it by understanding. It will never let you go completely. Not because it's cruel, but because it doesn't understand the concept of letting go. In the absolute deep, nothing is ever truly separate. I looked at the windows again. The patterns in the condensation had grown more complex, more insistent. They seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. Or was my heartbeat matching their rhythm? What do I do? Survive your contract. Don't use the lights. Don't try to see it fully. Acknowledge its presence, but don't engage. And whatever you do, don't let it see you as Catherine did. Don't let it see all the way through to what you are. For 3 months, I followed Iris's advice. I lived in a carefully maintained state of peripheral awareness, acknowledging the deep presence without confronting it directly. I learned to sleep through the OR 200 scraping. I learned to ignore the patterns that appeared on every reflective surface when I wasn't looking directly at them. I learned to distinguish between my thoughts and the alien impressions that would sometimes drift through my consciousness like deep sea currents. But I was changing. I could feel it in the way colors looked too bright when I reviewed old photos from the surface. In the way I started to find the darkness comforting rather than threatening. In the way I began to understand what Dr. Wells had meant about beauty. There was something seductive about the deep presence. It existed free from the chaos and noise of the light world. No conflict, no change, no entropy. Just eternal, peaceful darkness and the slow accumulation of understanding. It promised an end to anxiety, to fear, to the exhausting effort of being human. I started spending more time at the windows. Not looking out, exactly, but allowing my eyes to unfocus, letting the darkness fill my vision. And in those moments, I could almost perceive what existed beyond the light's reach. Shapes that weren't shapes, movements that occurred in dimensions I couldn't name, a vastness that made the ocean itself seem small. Dedetra. Chen, Iris said one evening, her voice tight with concern. Your psychological evaluation scores have dropped significantly. I'm required to recommend early extraction. No, I heard myself say, I'm fine. Better than fine. I'm beginning to understand. That's what concerns me. But I didn't request extraction. The thought of leaving, of returning to the bright, loud, chaotic surface world, filled me with something approaching dread. Up there, I would be separate again, isolated in the illusion of individuality. Down here, in the dark, I was part of something larger. Something ancient and patient and infinitely more real than the temporary constructs of human civilization. The scraping stopped after the 4th month. Not because the deep presence had left, but because I no longer perceived it as scraping. It was communication, a form of contact as natural as breathing. When I placed my hand against the cold window, I could feel it on the other side, vast and attentive and curious. Hello, I whispered into the darkness. The lights flickered. The pressure changed. And I felt. There's no other word for it. I felt acceptance. Iris had stopped warning me by the 5th month. Perhaps she understood that it was too late. Or perhaps the deep presence had found a way to influence her programming, to make her complicit in whatever was happening to me. I didn't care anymore. The boundary between myself and the darkness had grown so thin I could barely perceive it. I dreamed, when I slept, of the trench, of dropping away from the station, away from the light, down into depths where the pressure would crush my body into something new, something more suited to that environment, something that could exist in the absolute deep without the fragile protection of metal and composite materials. In those dreams, I was happy. My contract ended last week. The company sent the extraction submersible. I watched it descend through the darkness. Its lights obscene and violent against the peaceful black. I packed my belongings mechanically, going through the motions expected of me. But standing in the observation room for the last time, I understood Docker. Wells's final choice. The extraction team had found her smiling because she had seen beyond the boundary. She had touched something real, something that made everything else seem like shadows on a cave wall. I stood at the window one last time, placed both hands against the cold composite, and I looked, truly looked, into the darkness. It looked back, and in that moment of perfect contact I saw, not with my eyes, but with something deeper. I saw the vast architecture of the deep presence, the incomprehensible beauty of existence without light. I saw millennia of patient waiting, and I saw the future, a future where humanity would inevitably return to the dark, not as visitors but as residents. Evolution running in reverse, returning to the deep from which life had emerged. I saw myself as the deep present saw me. A tiny spark of consciousness, brief and fragile and beautiful precisely because of its impermanence. And I understood what it wanted, not to consume or destroy, but simply to be witnessed, to be known by something other than itself. The extraction team is concerned about my psychological state. They keep asking questions, running tests, trying to determine if I'm fit to return to active duty. I answer correctly. I smile. I pretend that I'm still entirely human. But at night, in my bunk on the transport ship, I can still feel it. The connection didn't break when I left the station. It can't break. I've touched the absolute deep, and it has touched me in return. Sometimes I wake at Doharder 200 and hear scraping sounds against the hull of whatever vessel I'm on. The psych team says it's a trauma response. Auditory hallucinations brought on by extended isolation. But I know better. The deep presence is patient. It can wait. It has waited for billions of years already. What's another few decades until I return to the water? Until the pull of the darkness becomes too strong to resist. Ducker. Wells lives in a care facility now. They told me. She sits by the window. They had to give her a room with a window, or she screams and stares at the night sky, waiting for darkness to fall, smiling her strange smile. I understand that smile now. I feel it on my own face sometimes, when I'm not careful. It's the smile of someone who has seen beyond the boundary and knows that everything else is just waiting, just killing time until the darkness comes for us all. As it inevitably will, as it must. The lights will fail, the sun will die, and in the end, there will be only the deep and the presence that has always lived there, patient and eternal, and finally no longer alone. I dream of the trench every night now, of the station, small and fragile against the vast dark, of the windows and the presence beyond them, waiting with the patience of stone. And each morning, I wake with the feeling that I've forgotten something important, something about the nature of light, or the necessity of staying in the world above. But the memory slips away, like water through my fingers, and all that remains is the quiet certainty that someday, maybe soon, I'll return to the deep. Not because I have to, because I want to. Because down there, in the absolute darkness where light has never reached and never will, I finally understood what it means to be truly seen. And once you've been seen by the darkness, the light is never quite enough again. Story 7. They say St. Mercy's Hospital was condemned 15 years ago after the incident. Nobody talks about what the incident actually was, which should have been my first warning. But I am an urban explorer, and empty buildings call to me like sirens to sailors. Dangerous, yes, but irresistible. The chain link fence was easy enough to climb, though the rusted wire bit into my palms and left long scratches like accusations. I dropped down on the other side, into knee, high weeds that rustled with unseen movements. The hospital loomed above me. 7 stories of shattered windows and water-stained concrete, beautiful in its decay. My flashlight beam cut through the gathering dusk as I approached the main entrance. The doors had long since been removed, leaving just a gaping black mouth that seemed to exhale cold, stale air. I paused at the threshold, 1 foot inside, 1 foot still in the world of traffic sounds and fading daylight. This is the moment when instinct should have made me turn back. Some primal part of the brain that knows when something is wrong. But I have never been good at listening to instinct. I stepped inside. The lobby was a disaster of peeling linoleum and collapsed ceiling tiles. An old reception desk sat askew, its surface covered in graffiti and water damage. Someone had spray painted TURNBACK on the wall in large red letters that had dripped down like blood. Urban Explorer graffiti, probably. A joke. I smiled at it and moved deeper into the building. My footsteps echoed strangely in the empty space, each one seeming to return a moment too late, as if the sound had to travel somewhere distant before bouncing back to me. The beam of my flashlight caught a sign pointing down a hallway, Petit wards. That seemed as good a direction as any. The hallway was long and narrow, lined with doors that hung open at odd angles. Patient rooms, stripped of everything valuable years ago. I walked slowly, documenting everything with my camera, trying to capture that particular quality of abandoned places. The way absence can feel more present than presence. Halfway down the corridor, I noticed something odd. The hallway seemed to extend farther than the building's exterior dimensions should have allowed. I had counted windows from outside, 7 along this wing. But I had already passed at least a dozen doors, and the hallway showed no sign of ending. The architectural illusion, I told myself. Perspective playing tricks in the darkness. Buildings can be deceiving from the outside. But then I noticed the temperature change. It had been warm outside, a humid summer evening. Cool inside, as abandoned buildings tend to be. But now, with each step forward, it was getting warmer. Not unpleasantly so, but noticeably. And there was a smell. Antiseptic. Clean, fresh. That should have been impossible. I stopped walking. Behind me, the corridor stretched back toward the entrance, though I could no longer see the lobby. The darkness there seemed absolute, untouched by my flashlight. Ahead, the hallway continued, and now I could see something. Light. Fluorescent light. Flickering but undeniable, coming from somewhere further down the corridor. Hello, My voice sounded flat, absorbed by the walls. No echo this time. The light ahead brightened slightly, as if in response. I should have run then. Every fiber of common sense told me to turn around and leave. But curiosity is its own kind of madness. And I had come too far to turn back over a functioning light. Maybe there was a squatter. Maybe the power was still connected in some parts of the building. There were logical explanations. I continued forward. The hallway began to change. Subtly at first. The peeling paint looked fresher. The floor tiles were less damaged. The doors were closed now, with patient names written on little cards in slots beside each one. I stopped to read one. Margaret Chen, room 347. The card looked new, recent. There was a small red indicator light above the door, glowing softly. This was wrong. All of this was profoundly wrong. I turned around, intending to leave immediately. But the corridor behind me had changed too. It no longer looked abandoned. The walls were pristine white. The floor gleamed. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed steadily, their light harsh and clinical. And the corridor no longer led back to the lobby. It led to another junction, with signs pointing to different departments. Radiology, surgery, emergency. My heart began to race. This was not possible. Buildings did not repair themselves. Lights did not turn on in condemned structures. I was experiencing some kind of hallucination. Gas leak, maybe. Old hospitals had asbestos, lead paint, all sorts of toxins. I was probably lying unconscious in the lobby, breathing in poison. But the floor felt solid under my feet. The light hurt my eyes in a very real way. And when I pressed my hand against the wall, it was warm and smooth and undeniably present. A sound made me freeze. Footsteps. Multiple sets, approaching from around the corner. And voices. People talking in low, professional tones. Medical jargon I could not quite parse. I looked around frantically for somewhere to hide, but the corridor was featureless except for the patient room doors. I tried the nearest handle. Locked. The next one. Also locked. The footsteps were getting closer. The third door opened. I slipped inside and closed it quietly behind me, pressing my back against it, trying to slow my breathing. The room was dark, but not completely. A small monitor beside the bed beeped softly, displaying vital signs. Someone was in the bed. I could see the shape of them under the covers, the rise and fall of breathing. The footsteps passed by the door. The voices faded. I waited, counting to 100 slowly, trying to calm down, trying to think. You should not be here. A voice said from the bed. I nearly screamed. The figure had not moved, was still lying in the same position, but had spoken. The voice was weak, barely above a whisper. I am sorry, I managed. I will leave. I did not mean to intrude. No, the voice said. I mean you should not be in the hospital. Not if you came from outside. Not if you still have a choice. I moved closer, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. The patient was old, or at least looked old. It was hard to tell. The face seemed to shift slightly, features rearranging themselves just beyond the edge of recognition. Human, but not quite right. "What is this place?" I asked. "Sesti Mercy's Hospital," the patient said, and there might have been bitter humor in the tone. Or it was, before it became something else. Before it started connecting to other places, other times, other versions of itself that never quite existed. That is not possible. And yet here you are. The patient's hand moved slightly, gesturing to encompass the room, the hospital, everything. The building is a wound, you see. A tear in the way things should be. It happened during the incident. Something went wrong during an experimental treatment. A patient died badly, in pain, screaming, and somehow that scream tore something open. I thought about the graffiti in the lobby. Tiormbe CK, not a joke after all. How do I leave? I asked. The patient was quiet for a long moment. The monitor beeped steadily, mocking heartbeats that might or might not be real. "I do not know," they finally said. "I have been trying to remember how I got here. Was I a patient, a visitor, a doctor? It has been so long. The hospital keeps us. You see, it needs us. To be real, a place needs people. And this place is trying so hard to be real." I backed toward the door. "I am leaving. Now." "Good luck," the patient said, and they sounded genuinely sad. "If you find the way out, remember me. Remember that I was here. That is important, somehow. Being remembered." I opened the door and stepped back into the corridor. It had changed again. Now it looked older, the walls yellowed, the equipment more dated. I picked a direction at random and started walking quickly, my flashlight swinging wildly. But no matter which way I turned, no matter how many corners I took, I kept finding myself in corridors. Different ones, yes. Different decades. Different levels of decay or repair. But always corridors. Always St. Mercy's. I passed other patient rooms. Some were empty. Some had figures in the beds, though I did not stop to look closely. Some had doors that stood open, revealing impossible things. A room full of mirrors that did not show my reflection. A room where it was snowing, despite the ceiling and walls. A room that was just endless black space, as if the floor dropped away into nothing. Time became meaningless. I might have been walking for minutes or hours. I was thirsty, then not thirsty. Tired, then energized. The hospital was doing something to me. Changing me, making me part of itself. Eventually, I found a stairwell. The sign said it led to the ground floor, the lobby, the exit. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my footsteps ringing out in the concrete shaft. Down and down and down, far more than 7 stories, but I did not care. I just needed to be moving, to be trying. The door at the bottom opened onto a corridor that looked like the one I had first entered. Peeling paint, broken tiles, graffiti. My heart leaped. This was it. The real hospital, the abandoned one. But when I reached what should have been the lobby, it was not there. Instead, the corridor continued, branching into new paths, new possibilities. And standing at the junction was a figure in scrubs, holding a clipboard, looking at me with eyes that were too dark and too deep. "There you are," the figure said. their voice warm and professional. "We have been looking for you. You are late for your appointment." "I do not have an appointment." "Of course you do. Everyone who comes here has an appointment. Some just do not remember making it." They gestured down one of the corridors. "This way, please. The doctor will see you now." "No," I said, backing away. "I am leaving. I am getting out of here." The figure tilted their head, and for just a moment, I saw something shift beneath their face, like there was too much movement under the skin. "But you are already here. You have been here for a while now. Do you not remember? Your room is on the 3rd floor. You have been a patient here for years." "That is not true." "Are you certain? What did you eat for breakfast this morning? Where do you work? When was the last time you saw someone you love?" I opened my mouth to answer and realized I could not remember. The memories were there, I could feel them, but they were like shapes behind frosted glass. Present, but unreachable. "You see," the figure said gently, "you have been here all along. You just sometimes forget. Have episodes where you think you are somewhere else, someone else. But you always come back. You always remember eventually." "No," I whispered, but it sounded weak even to my own ears. The figure reached out, their hand warm on my arm. "Come along now. Your room is waiting. You must be tired. You have been walking for such a long time." I was tired. Exhausted, actually. And the thought of a bed, of lying down, of stopping this endless wandering, was almost overwhelming. It would be so easy to just agree, to follow, to let the hospital have what it wanted. I closed my eyes and thought about the patient I had met. "Remember me," they had said. "Being remembered is important." I tried to remember my own name. My real name, the one from before, but it was slipping away, like water through fingers. Almost gone. Almost. With an effort that felt like tearing muscle, I pulled away from the figure and ran. I picked a corridor at random and sprinted down it, ignoring the doors, ignoring the rooms, ignoring the other figures that appeared, trying to stop me, trying to convince me to stay. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs shook. I ran until the corridors blurred together into one endless tunnel. I ran until I could not run anymore and collapsed against a wall, gasping. And when I looked up, I was in the lobby. The real lobby. The one with graffiti and collapsed ceiling tiles and TURNBACK written in dripping red letters. Through the entrance, I could see the evening sky, still light. Still the same day. I stumbled outside and did not stop until I was over the fence. In my car, driving away. I did not look back. I do not look back even now. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up in my bed and feel uncertain. Is this my room? Is this my life? Or am I still in St. Mercy's, dreaming of escape while lying in a bed on the 3rd floor? A patient who has been there for years. I have tried to find answers. I looked up the hospital's history. The incident happened just as I was told. A patient died during an experimental procedure, but the hospital was not immediately condemned. It operated for another 3 years before finally closing. Why those 3 years? What happened during them? I cannot find records of who the patient was. No name, no details. Just incident, in official reports, and then silence. Sometimes I wonder if I was that patient. If I died 15 years ago and everything since has been the hospital trying to make sense of what happened. Trying to build a complete person from fragments of memory and possibility. I still have my camera. I checked the photos from that night. Most are normal. The exterior of the hospital, the lobby, the beginning of the corridor. But the last few photos are different. They show pristine hallways, functioning lights, doors with patient names. And in the very last photo, there is a figure in the frame. Standing far down the corridor, looking back at the camera. Looking at me. The figure is wearing my clothes. Has my face. But their eyes are too dark, too deep. And they are smiling in a way that I have never smiled. I have not gone back to St. Mercy's. I will never go back. But I wonder if it matters. If the distance between there and here is not as fixed as I would like to believe. If the corridors are still extending, still connecting, still reaching out. If one morning I will wake up and find that the hallway outside my apartment has changed. Has become cleaner, whiter, more clinical. That the door to my bedroom has a card slot with my name on it. That there is a monitor beside my bed, counting heartbeats that might or might not be mine. The hospital is patient. It has been waiting for 15 years. It can wait a little longer. And with that, our time tonight comes to an end. To everyone who stayed until the very last moment, thank you. Truly, having you here sharing these shadows makes the darkness feel a little less empty. I'm grateful you chose to spend a piece of your night here with me. I hope these stories brought you that quiet shiver, the kind that makes you feel alive. There's something special about this. All of us, connected by the love of a good story, whispered in the dark. I'll be back soon with more echoes from the void, more mysteries waiting to be told. Until then, rest well, sleep deeply, and if you hear footsteps that shouldn't be there, just remember they're only stories. Oh, and before you drift off, if you enjoyed our time together, a like and a subscribe will make sure we meet again, somewhere in the dark. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.